Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 2 of our story. If you like this what if story and want to see part 3, let me know in the comments below. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Also, check the description for more great content and my playlist. This story was posted by Armored Lord 1115 on Wattpad. Now let's start. Finally, I don't have to watch those two flirting, thought Hajime in his head as he remembered how you turned biting Izuku's neck into a SXL act when she started to rub herself against Izuku's crotch, and they were definitely one step away from having section. He didn't want to admit it, but he was getting uncomfortable. They were quite deep in the abyss that they should be thinking about how to safely arrive at the Maverick Lair rather than messing around like the two were doing, but he decided to ignore it for now. The current location of the floor was quite odd in the sense that they found themselves in a forest. They were so used to the darkness of the labyrinth and the abnormal-looking monsters that it took them off guard. A dinosaur was growling at the group of 3 in an attempt to intimidate them, but it only seemed to anger it when realizing that the group was not the least bit intimidated. A flower was on its nose for some reason. Grierarg. The dinosaur let out a loud roar towards the group, who were clearly unimpressed by its intimidation skill as they looked at it blankly. Finding a forest halfway down the dungeon was already really weird. Now dinosaurs too? Questioned Hajime blankly towards the dinosaurs. And why's that flower on its head? Asked Hajime, finding the flower to be out of place, but Izuku could probably guess what it was since his sensory abilities seemed to be far greater. It's being controlled by that flower. It's either being brainwashed or their body is being hijacked by something, said Izuku, commenting what he was sensing while Hajime got tense as he decided to stay on guard. Crimson Javelin, you fired a flame that turned into a spiral-shaped spear and pierced through the mouth of the insolent dinosaur that dared to roar at Izuku, which caused its face to be incinerated. You currently stood on her own feet as opposed to before when she struggled on her own feet. Izuku's BLD had made her recover faster than she normally should be, but that's because she realized that Izuku was unique and possibly not a human. You could tell that Izuku had no idea about it, especially considering that they were humans who were summoned in this world to act as humanity's hero, so she concluded that he wouldn't know about the changes unless something too abnormal became apparent. She decided to observe him for now because she felt there is more to Izuku. She turned to Izuku and by extension Hajime with an excited smile on her face. "Well, am I being useful?" asked Yu with a smile on her face and her hand raised and clenched, showing her own enthusiasm to contribute to clearing the labyrinth and not being a deadweight to the group. So useful, I'm kind of feeling like a deadweight," said Hajime. It was unknown whether he was being sarcastic or genuine, but Yu had decided to accept his words as such, but she wanted to know Izuku's opinion the most out of the two. "I think you may be the greatest magic user I've ever met so far," said Izuku with a smile as he gazed down at Yu with a smile which made her smile with a bright smile. As they walked deeper, Izuku had kept stealing glances at Yu. There was something about her that reminded him of something, or rather of someone of the past, but that didn't make sense to him. Whenever he looked at Yu, he could only remember a appealing woman who had fairly long, straight flaxen hair as well as dark-colored eyes, and a very fair complexion. She wore her bangs short and swooping off to the right side of her face. Her eyebrows were noticeably darker than the rest of her hair. "This is odd. I know those two aren't connected, but is it because they both look alike? Is that why I'm particularly fond of her? Does that have something to do with that dream I've been having?" thought Izuku deeply in his head, but decided to put it on later. The group continued on while occasionally dealing with the monsters. Yu, being eager among the group, had started to display her talent in magic to dispatch those monsters. "It's great that you're eager and all, Butari, you may be overdoing it a little," asked Hajime as he looked at Yu, who stood at the front to deal with the monsters that attacked them. "I've got to help out. I'm both your partner, so I can't just stand back and let you two do all the work," said Yu with conviction in her eyes to help the two who had saved her from the darkness. Yu of course dreamt of being saved by a knight, more specifically a knight of Sparta, but she didn't want to be constantly saved like she was some kind of a damsel of distress who can't fight. She wants to be able to stand by their side, more so by Izuku's side. Not to mention, she still had her pride as queen of an entire race. "Don't worry, Yu. You've already been a great help to the two of us, but it's best if you conserve your magic instead for a much greater enemy," said Izuku as he patted her head. Said Yu with a blush on both her cheeks as she enjoyed the gesture of being patted on the head by Izuku, while Hajime on the other hand rubbed his head since he was acting soft towards their new companion. "Seriously, what the hell's wrong with me? The way I'm acting now would have made me laugh a few days back," thought Hajime to himself before his eyes narrowed as if sensing something. 10 monsters incoming. Let's hit with a preemptive attack," said Hajime while Izuku nodded his head as he too was prepared to attack. As they rushed, Izuku and Hajime had noted that they were being surrounded. It seems that whoever was controlling them had some form of intelligence in them, unless the dinosaurs can work as a pack. Hiding in the bushes of the forest, Hajime was quick to point the barrel of Donner to the source of the problem, which happened to be the flower, and with precision, he shot the bullet. Blam! Hajime's bullet pierced through the flower on the nose of one of the dinosaurs in order to test a theory. This caused the dinosaur to fall to the ground, but it was not over, at least that's what Izuku could see. "I guess flowers are all the rage now," commented Hajime as he looked at the defeated monster, but he was not convinced that it was dead. "I thought it looked cute," said Yu as they looked at the unmoving monster, but Izuku had his hand on the sheath of the sword ready to attack and behead the monster. "Be on guard, it's probably just recovering from whatever the hell it was mind controlling it just now," said Izuku while the two nodded, and just like Izuku had predicted, the dinosaur stood up. "Griarg! Rayarg!" roared the dinosaur in anger as it started stepping on the flower. It was obvious to Izuku that the monster was very angry. "What the hell's wrong with it?" asked Hajime in confusion at the odd behavior of the dinosaur. He had thought that this was it for his anger. It's angry at whoever was controlling him earlier. It's why it was stepping on those flowers. "It's best if we avoid them instead and head to the source of the parasites and eliminate them," said Izuku, giving his own input while the two agreed with him. The dinosaur turned towards them, having finally noticed their presence as they stared at each other, but Izuku got annoyed by it and made the move as he cut off its head swiftly and cleanly, causing it to roll on the ground. "It's best if we start going. Sooner or later, we will be chased by countless monsters who are afflicted with those parasites," said Izuku as he started to run towards the direction. Just as Izuku said that, a group of dinosaurs started stampeding towards all of them at high speed, and all of them with no exception had the parasitic flower on their noses. Hajime couldn't help but get annoyed by this as he too started to run while Izuku easily scooped Yu in his arms. "Frost Prison," shouted Yu, who pointed her hand from Izuku's shoulder as she released a supreme rank ice magic that would freeze its surrounding in 50-meter dimension, which caused the dinosaurs to be frozen solid in ice. Despite Yu wiping out a whole pack of the monsters, the others who didn't get caught in the range of the spell still continued without even faltering one bit, which only proves that they were being mind-controlled to chase them around. Still, Yu's action had only bought them time to get away from them and head towards a cave which they could guess where the perpetrator behind those parasitic flowers is in. "Yeah, this is it for sure," said Hajime as he looked at the entrance of the cave, while Izuku let Yu stand on her feet while she smiled but was still confused at Hajime's words. "How do you know?" asked Yu, clearly curious as to how Hajime had come to this conclusion that the perpetrator was hiding in there, while Izuku decided to answer. "The dinosaurs got really riled up whenever we ran in this direction. It was obvious it was trying to keep us away from here. Whoever is controlling them had wanted us to be overwhelmed by the number of the dinosaurs, or at the very least exhaust us," said Izuku while Hajime also nodded his own head in agreement. "Let's first block the entrance before they chase us down again. We won't be heading back outside till we deal with the mastermind anyway," said Hajime as he placed his hand on the ground. And the sound of the earth rising up from the ground and clogging the entrance could be heard as Hajime had blocked any possible entrance of the dinosaurs in case the mastermind decided to use them to overwhelm them. "I'm not sensing anything, but something still seems off," said Hajime as he looked around, being more on guard. "I'm sure lots of monsters here can hide their presence. Stay sharp," said Hajime as he looked at the two. Izuku couldn't sense anything as well since it was getting hard to do so. Still, he was the one with the most sensitive sensory ability, so he was able to notice something off. As if realizing that, green ball that were actually spores started to be released in the surrounding area, which signaled the attack of the monster that remained hidden. "Behind us!" shouted Izuku as he teleported away, while Hajime also took to jumping back as well. You had jumped in the air, floating, and formed a barrier around her to protect herself from the attack made by the enemy before it had finally disappeared. The hell was that? Hajime was quite confused, while Izuku understood that whatever it tried to do had failed on him and Hajime, which left only one person to worry about, and that was you herself. "Run, Izuku!" shouted Yu, who was the closest to him at the time, as her hand raised without her control and fired an attack that sliced through where Izuku once stood. Izuku had teleported just in time to avoid the attack, having realized that you may have gotten affected by those spores, as he looked at Yu, whose hand was stretched out and was trembling in horror and shame given that she had attacked him. A humanoid-shaped monster appeared, grabbing Yu by her chin and raising it up. It was obvious to the two that it was holding the former vampire queen as a hostage, hiding behind her for extra protection in order to discourage the two from attacking her. "Izuku, I'm sorry," said Yu, clearly in distress, as a flower grew on the top of her head before her hand was raised up once more and pointed towards the two as if ready to charge for another attack. "I can't control my body," Yu said, as the spell that she was charging was definitely going to be a strong one. Hajime could only jump back, grunting in annoyance as he realized that the earlier attack was spores. "So these little ball were spores. Now you've done it," said Hajime as he distanced himself from the monster and by extension Yu herself, while also wondering how to deal with this situation. "Did you people forget just who I am?" said Izuku with a grin as he took an IAI stance of the Dark Slayer style. The monster seemed threatened, but it didn't think that the attack would reach it. He slashed so fast that he had cut the flower on Yu's head cleanly without harming her, while at the same time cutting half of the monster face, which with its brain cut off, it instantly died before it realized what happened. Yu was surprised and touched her own head. Her head remained unharmed, showing how skilled Izuku was when he had cut through the monster who was holding her as a captive and the flower on her head without touching her hair. "You okay? You're hurt anywhere?" asked Izuku as he checked up on the former vampire queen, who blushed. Once again, she was saved by him from a threat. She didn't know if she should be happy that she was saved, or should she be upset with herself for causing such a blunder and putting the man she loves in danger because she let the enemy control her that easily. Still, hearing his words of worries over her made her heart flutter in happiness and hugged him tightly, which Izuku returned the gesture by wrapping his arm around her as she felt comfortable in his arms. "I'm fine. You saved me again," said Yu with a blush on her cheeks, while Hajime on the other hand had ignored the two lovebirds and went towards the monster. "It's only natural I'd save you. Now, let's take a rest. You can drink my BLD during that time, since we're going to be heading to the final floor," said Izuku with a grin on his face. Yu nodded her head shyly as she buried her face in his neck and sank her fang in his neck and started to drink his BLD. Izuku scooped her up in the air as he walked towards Hajime, who started to cook the monster meat. Izuku, Yu and Hajime walked down the stairs as they were met with a large room and two double doors that would lead inside the Oscar lair. That means that the Great Orcus Labyrinth was much deeper than people realized. "My skills don't sense anything up ahead, but my instincts tell me that going farther is dangerous," said Hajime with a grin on his face. This was the final floor. "Finally. It felt like forever since we first fell here," said Izuku, feeling relieved that this will be over. His stamina isn't going to last forever if this keeps going on for that long. "Izuku," said Yu softly, her voice shows understanding because once they walk inside the lair of Oscar, they will be safe and may finally find a way to leave the labyrinth. "Whatever's waiting up ahead, we've just gotta plow through it. Let's go," said Hajime with a grin as he prepared his weapons as they all walked towards the door, only for a black summoning magic circle to appear in front of the three. It was the same summoning circle that had summoned the behemoth, albeit this one was larger as it took a large portion of the room. It was obvious that the monster will be far bigger than anything they have ever faced up to this point. "You two get ready. Something really powerful is coming," said Hajime as he prepared his weapon ready to attack the monster when it showed up. "Way to state the obvious, Mr. Edgelord," said Izuku with a grin, which resulted in veins to pop in the temple of Hajime's forehead as he was tempted to start shooting Izuku for that comment. I'm not an edgelord, shouted Hajime with a scowl before a hydra appeared. Their large imposing figure was casting a noticeable shadow onto the group as they could all see 6 heads. You gotta to be kidding me, this is way too overkill. Whoever made that monster, I need to have a talk with him, said Izuku, speaking Hajime's own thoughts as well. First dinosaurs, now straight-up myths, shouted Hajime angrily, also clearly outraged by the final boss as he knew that this was going to be their hardest fight ever. The red head of the Hydra had opened its mouth as it let out a terrifying roar that would zap away the will of any person, but not for Izuku, Hime, or you who are strong. Its maw started to build up mana in its mouth, forming a ball of condensed fire before expelling it towards the group. Hajime had quickly used his skill to just avoid the incoming attack before he started to shoot several bullets at one of the heads, managing to injure it much to his relief. Donner's strong enough to wound it, thought he had thought this was going to be a repeat of the scorpion whom he couldn't penetrate its own skin. You take the middle head. Izuku shouted the orders as he started to send slash attacks at one of the heads, injuring it badly with his sword skill and almost looked like he defeated it. Crimson Javelin, shouted Yu as she fired a spiral-shaped spear that is made of fire magic which pierced through the head of the Hydra. With 3 heads being destroyed so far, it almost seemed that this was going to be a win for them, but it wasn't that easy. The yellow-headed Hydra started to morph the surrounding terrain to protect the injured 3 heads while the white head had started to heal the other injured head. And here it is. I knew this wasn't really going to be this easy. Each head is specialized, said Izuku, grunting in annoyance as he started to slash as well to interrupt the healing. Unfortunately, the yellow-headed Hydra wasn't going to allow him to do so and had intercepted his attacks by morphing the surrounding terrain to block his attacks. This thing is annoyingly well-rounded, grunted Hajime as he pulled 3 flash grenades that exploded and released a blinding flashlight that had just disoriented the heads of the Hydra. Izuku, cover me, said Hajime with annoyance while the 2 were quick to nod their head, willing to help Hajime as well. Izuku took the IAI stance of the Dark Slayer style while Yu was ready to charge a lighting spell. The black-headed Hydra looked at Yu, who seemed to be the weakest of the group, well in terms of mind resistance anyways, and decided to exploit it as it attacked Yu and looked directly in her eyes. No! Yu screamed as the black-headed monster inflicted illusion on Yu, causing her to see herself back in the very same room that she was sealed inside. She saw as Izuku turned his back on her along with Hajime and left her with the door closing behind them, leaving her in the deep darkness of her prison. She couldn't bear with such a thought, as part of her believed that this whole thing with Izuku and Hajime was nothing more than just a figment of her own imagination. No! Screamed Yu in anguish as her red eyes went dull, showing that she was put in illusion. This shocked both Izuku and Hajime, with Izuku quickly acting by teleporting towards her. Hajime, focus on the Hydra, I'll go see you, said Izuku. The tone of his voice left no argument. He kept firing magic bullets at the Hydra that tried to obstruct his path, which had damaged it heavily. Do it quickly. I don't think I can keep that demon Hydra in check on my own. Hajime admitted he can only last around 5 minutes at best, but nothing more than this because eventually he will get overwhelmed. Get a hold of yourself, said Izuku as he shook Yu before he pulled an ambrosia vial and forced her to drink it, which had successfully managed to get Yu to wake up from the illusion. Izuku kept firing magic bullets which kept bombarding the Hydra, which was to help Hajime while he checked on Yu's health, who started to wake up after he gave her an ambrosia. Izuku! Yu's voice came out weakly as tears spilled from her eyes as she realized that this was earlier an illusion. She was too terrified that this was all just a dream that she had imagined, but she was glad that it wasn't. Yep, it's me. This was just an illusion. You okay? Asked Izuku while rubbing the back of his head as he kept occasionally throwing magic bullets at the Hydra to slow it down, and gave Hajime an opening. Thank goodness. I thought I'd been abandoned again. I thought I'd be alone in the dark again, said Yu in a weak voice as she touched his cheek while Izuku felt sad for her. Why would I abandon the women I fell in love with? Said Izuku, suddenly surprising Yu by his words. Before he grabbed her face with both his hands and gave her a passionate kiss filled with all the love he had for her. Yu closed her eyes, feeling her heart thumping hard in her chest as she realized that she wasn't the only one who harbored such feelings. Izuku separated from the kiss. This place isn't going to be our graveyard, instead it will be this monster's graveyard. I will not abandon you, we will defeat this monster and one day we will find a way back to my home, or rather our home," said Izuku, putting a lot of emphasis on the hour. You couldn't help but smile happily at his words as she realized how silly her previous thought was. Izuku wasn't going to really abandon her and neither was she going to abandon him either. "You two lovebirds, I need help there," shouted Hajime with annoyance as he noticed from his peripheral vision the two lovebirds kissing, and he got a lot more annoyed, but he ignored it because Izuku was helping him by firing those weird black magic bullets. "I need to use 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲, but I can only fire one shot at a time and this will leave me open, so you two cover for me," said Hajime while Izuku and you nodded their heads. 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐽. This is definitely a fantasy world if you're allowed to say such a corny name that would make us both the laughing stock of the entire society as a whole, Izuku said in a mocking tone while Hajime gave a wry smile. It was definitely true. They'd be looked at disgustingly by a lot of people if they started naming their things with such edgy names. They'd be called a parasitic otaku with no life at all. Crimson Javelin. Force Lasher. Glacial Sleet. Shouted you as several tornadoes appeared surrounding the Hydra, along with lighting, and even ice started to rain on the Hydra. Seeing you working hard, the two best friends smiled at each other as they both started to attack the Hydra, with Izuku slashing hard at one of the heads, decapitating the red head completely, hence it cannot be brought back. Hajime on the other hand started to fire many bullets on the Hydra. The black head of the Hydra tried to once more put you out of commission through the same illusion, but it never worked. You could only touch her lips as she remembered her kiss with Izuku earlier and smiled, knowing that the illusion will never work on her again. Whether that was because she had developed resistance or because she knew Izuku won't abandon her was up to debate. "That won't work again," shouted you as she released a lightning strike that impacted the insolent black-headed Hydra, sending it flying towards Hajime as it tried to debuff Hajime, but it wouldn't work on him, as he started to fire 3 consecutive bullets at its head, injuring it before he pulled 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐽 and created an air platform as he levitated off the ground and pointed the barrel at all of them, intending to take them all out together. "I'll take 'em out all at once," Hajime shouted as he pointed the barrel with an insane grin as it started to charge magic power before firing it, which released a powerful blast that impacted the Hydra. "Heavenly Blaze," shouted you as she released fire lighting orbs that had surrounded the Hydra before it released all at once, lighting on the Hydra, which made it shriek in a lot of pain, while Izuku took this chance to also fire several magic bullets at the Hydra. This caused 2 heads of the Hydra to disintegrate from the powerful spells. You was starting to get somewhat tired, but she was able to stand back on her feet. She already had enough supply of magic from having on Izuku's BLD. "You okay?" asked Izuku as he made a mistake of turning his back on a powerful monster as he walked towards her. "Izuku!" shouted you, which made Izuku alarmed as he looked as the blue head of the Hydra appeared before it narrowed its eyes on you, who had taken down 2 of its heads. It reared its head back, preparing a breath attack, in which Izuku acted as quick as he could to shield you as he appeared in front of her just in time to block the ice breath attack. Izuku had let out a mighty battle cry. This was really nothing, but he was getting a little bit overwhelmed since his stamina was already low. The breath attack swallowed him, but in the end he had managed to shield you. The temperature of the room had decreased to such a degree that it started to snow and the area became somewhat foggy. Izuku coughed BLD in surprise as he fell on his back exhausted. Such an attack had taken him by surprise and he was overwhelmed. Normally, Izuku should have been able to tank it, but it was too much with his current low stamina, and even his own magic was not really that infinite, so he had started to feel his consciousness fading as he had started to faint slowly on his back. "Izuku!" shouted you in clear distress as she held on to him, only to notice the BLD pooling from him. It was obvious that the attack damaged him and his accelerated healing was slow as compared to before. The Hydra created 2 purple orbs next to it and fired a consecutive blast of ice towards the 2, only for Hajime to intercept it with several bullets, having a cold look on his face. His own best friend was hurt by that piece of SHT and he won't forgive it. "Take Izuku away, I will make that piece of you regret the day he was born," shouted Hajime as he started to fire bullets at the Hydra, which flinched at the attack as Hajime used his skill aerodynamic to lure it away from Yu and Izuku. "Hang in there, Izuku," said Yu as she started to drag Izuku somewhere safe as she decided to follow Hajime's orders, who was fighting against the Hydra, but this time he was alone and she doubted he would last long. "Drink, Izuku?" Yu urged in a panic as she tried to push the ambrosia vial in his mouth to get him to drink it, but he could only cough it out, which made her even more distressed since Izuku can't drink it in his current unconscious state. Forcing the vial down her mouth, she grabbed his face and started to perform mouth-to-mouth as she helped him drink the ambrosia in order to benefit from its healing properties. She then pulled 2 other ambrosia vials and repeated the same action out of desperation to save Izuku's life. As she looked at him with tears in her eyes in clear panic, not wanting to lose him like this. "Heal quickly," said Yu desperately before a scream of pain was heard, and she looked to see Hajime having lost his right eye with one of the attacks, but this didn't diminish his fighting spirit. "Teammate," shouted Yu as she saw him get injured and fall on one knee, not looking at her. Hajime still planning to continue fighting even if it meant to fight till his last breath. "Focus on healing him, I won't die that easily from losing one eye," Hajime said as he continued to fire many bullets, this time being careful not to get caught in its attack. The Hydra, getting annoyed by Hajime acting like a bug and evading its own attack, had decided to shift its attention to Izuku and Yu and fired a powerful ice breath attack towards them. Yu, seeing this, was quick to create hollow ground, which had resulted in the breath attack impacting the barrier, cracking it. "You knew that the barrier won't hold on for long and will shatter with the next attack. Eyes on me, you piece of," roared Hajime as he started to rapidly fire at the Hydra, who proceeded to headbutt Hajime by surprise before it started to charge another breath attack to take down Yu and Izuku. "Not like this. He promised to take me back home with him. This is my fault. If I was stronger then I wouldn't have burdened him," thought Yu in her head as she blamed herself for holding him back. If she defended herself, Izuku wouldn't have needed to shield her with his own body. In an act of pure defiance, Yu let out a roar of frustration with both her hands extended towards the Hydra. A blast of pure magic shot from both her outstretched hand and collided with the Hydra attack before overpowering it and swallowing the Hydra completely in the attack. The explosion of Yu's attack could be heard as the Hydra was sent flying and impacting the wall. It was unknown whether it died or not, but this should have damaged it quite enough. "This is 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴, sorry," shouted Hajime, who, when he turned to look at the former vampire queen, he was quick to turn his face away with a blush on his face as he saw her current state. Yu, who can be said to possess the body of a 12-year-old child, had gained a massive growth spurt. She still possessed the same wavy golden blonde hair, crimson red eyes, and porcelain complexion. The difference this time is that she now had a very large bust size that would make many women very envious of her, and she looked like a mature woman in her 20s. She can no longer be called a lowly vampire. Her aura as a mature woman definitely now matches her appearance as opposed to before when she looked like a child with the presence of a very mature woman. "What happened?" said Yu as she looked at her current mature form. She was surprised, but then she remembered how she had been on Izuku BLD throughout their time here and realized that it was because of that. The Hydra stood back, but it was badly injured and it was swaying around, accidentally hitting its head on the walls. Hajime grinned as he saw something like this as he realized that they could win this. The Hydra started to fire ice attack in a blinding manner, not caring this time. Unfortunately for the monster, Hajime's skill, Airwalk, had evolved to give him plus blink, allowing him to perceive the attacks of the Hydra, who looked slower, but it was him who had just gotten faster. He started to use his skill, Airwalk, to shoot 2 holes in the ceiling before as he placed one grenade on one of the holes while throwing the other one at the other hole. It was obvious that Hajime intended to bury the Hydra. The Hydra seemed to have realized this, and with Hajime airborne and with him being in its line of sight, had opened its maw ready to unleash a point-blank breath attack. Suddenly, BLD gushed from everywhere around its body as it let out a loud shriek filled with pain as everyone looked surprised as they saw Izuku on his feet, fully healed. "I don't intend to die here. I will be ashamed to call myself a man if I make the women I like cry like this," said Izuku, trying to be cool in front of Yu, who was overjoyed to see him back on his own feet as he wiped his mouth with the back of his BLD-stained white glove. Izuku! Shouted Yu with tears in her eyes as she hugged him tightly while he held her, but he was blushing hard because he had noticed the current form that Yu was taking. This is for messing with Izuku and Yu. Shouted Hajime as he had fired 2 bullets at the 2 grenades, which caused it to explode and resulted in the ceiling of the room to fall on top of the Hydra. Using transmute, he made sure that rock pillars would appear to block the Hydra from escaping. Yu and Izuku looked at each other and nodded with determination in their eyes. Azure Blaze! Shouted Yu as spheres of blue-white flames 6 to 7 meters in diameter appeared above the Hydra that had tormented them. Judgment Cut! Shouted Izuku as he took the IAI stance of the Dark Slayer style and slashed so many times, causing BLD to gush out from all over its body while Yu's spell impacted the Hydra, disintegrating it in an instant. Seeing as the Hydra was never coming back, Hajime let himself fall on his back before fainting immediately from exhaustion, while Izuku fell on his but a little bit too exhausted, but the ambrosia mix with his accelerated healing, he was able to remain conscious. Yu also fell, but Izuku easily caught her in his arm as she hugged him tightly, burying her face in the crook of his neck. She was clearly happy, and for some reason she wasn't really tired. Instead, she was brimming with more magic. "I'm so happy that you're alive. I thought I lost you," said Yu, tears welling up in her eyes, while Izuku felt guilty for making her cry and hugged her tightly as he buried his face in her hair. "I'm sorry. I will try my best to no longer make you cry," said Izuku in a softer tone as she looked at him with tears still in her eyes, but this time those eyes carry her love for the man before her. Understanding what was going on, the two leaned into each other until their noses were touching each other and kissed passionately. The two didn't know how long, but they didn't care about anything. "I love you, Izuku," said Yu, having separated from the kiss as she hugged him tightly, burying her face in his neck and enjoying every moment together like this. "I love you too," said Izuku with a smile before he lifted her up in a bridal style, making her wrap her arm around his neck with her face buried in his own neck. Izuku turned his attention to the unconscious Hajime and then lifted him up using telekinesis, as he looked at the 2 large double doors that would lead inside the Oscar lair. What is the meaning of this?" Inko's voice could be heard echoing in the church where the current Pope Ishtar Langbard resides. It was night at the Hylian Kingdom. The deaths of both Izuku Midoriya as well as Hajime Nagumo was still fresh on people's minds, and it was something that was whispered to this day, and most of those conversations were quite unpleasant to hear. Those conversations came from the nobles in the kingdom. Hajime Nagumo was a synergist with 10 in all of his stats. Hajime only had 2 skills as far as everyone knows, which were transmutation and language comprehension, which compared to the rest of the hero party, he was the odd duck. It was obvious that Hajime's treatment was different compared to the rest of the students, as he was treated as a deadweight, albeit it was never voiced, but one can sense their feeling from just the atmosphere alone. Even the maids that worked in the castle had always looked down on Hajime, with them whispering behind his back or in most cases pretend to be deaf and ignore Hajime whenever he asked them for something. It was disheartening, but Hajime never did care and ignored it. Now that Hajime is dead, those noble voices were heard as they stopped hiding their true feelings of Hai. Words of insult were thrown around and nobody even bothered to remember his name. It was used to refer to Hajime as he was just seen as a peasant who held the hero party back. Izuku, who while treated better than Hajime, was still received with suspicious looks from the other nobles in the kingdom of Hylian. It was the first time that a person's appearance had started to change just from receiving a job, and as such rumors had spread around. He was seen as secretly a demon, which isn't exactly false but also not true. Izuku was only a half-demon, albeit he was unaware of such a fact, but those rumors had spread and it became no longer a rumor but rather some kind of a hard fact. Not surprising enough, Ishtar had instigated some of those rumors for the simple reason that the older pope didn't like Izuku, given that he had viewed Izuku as a threat to his plans and probably out of pettiness for what happened at the start of their first meeting. Izuku had been trying to discourage the students from going to war, and if he succeeded, they would lose a lot of pawns that can be used in the war against the demons, and Ishtar can't have that because that would displease a hit. In that sense, Izuku was like the perfect counter to Cookie Amanagawa, who is the hero. While Cookie was driven by his own sense of justice and morality and encouraged the other students to help him in his crusade to fight the demons, Izuku protested against it. Izuku knew there will be those who will continue to fight regardless of what he says and regardless of the danger, but he had wanted to discourage many of the students who don't have what it takes to survive to back away, to spare them from trauma and from getting killed. Many of the students had mixed fiction with real life. The concept of plot armor like in those fiction novels doesn't really exist here. This was real life where a mistake can reap away your life and there is no coming back from it. Their sense of justice and morality does not apply in a world where the strong live and the weak get trampled on and die forgotten. He even tried to appeal to them by reminding them of their families, and it seemed to work for some, but cookies seemed to also counter him by gaslighting them. Hence it was an intense struggle between the two, and Ishtar was getting fed up, so he spread the rumors. Naturally, the student will lean on the righteous and heroic person, which is Cookie, rather than the person with very bad rumors surrounding him. With Izuku's and Hajime's death, Ishtar imagined that Cookie won't be hindered anymore and can lead the hero party to fight in the war. Unfortunately for him, many of the students finally cowered in fear when finally realizing that Izuku's words were true. They regretted not listening, and some of them outright shut themselves in their respective rooms, clearly showing signs of trauma from watching two of their classmates die before them. They couldn't be blamed. Those people lived in a world where peace was just maintained by the symbol of peace all might, so seeing death was like a slap to their faces that reminded them that they were not in Japan. If someone like Midoriya died, then someone like me will definitely die next. I don't want to die. I don't want to fight anymore. Please return me back home. Please don't call me a hero. I'm no hero, I am a coward who want to go home. Those were some of the words that were muttered by the students who got their fighting spirit drained from them after seeing the death of two of their classmates. Some had just gone completely mute and became shut in, who had their food delivered in front of their rooms by the maids. Even in death, your influence over them is still gripping onto them. Curse you, thought Ishtar when he had witnessed and heard the current situation with the heroes, or rather the pawns. Ishtar tried to force them to continue fighting for a hit's entertainment. They're seriously not expecting that they will be living in the castle and be treated as royalty while doing nothing. At this point, they're being a nuisance as they're investing their own resources onto them. Inko, the teacher, had heard and came to him in the dead of the night to fight against his decision to force the unwilling kids to return to the battlefield. As the only adult in the group, she was responsible for them. You're forcing the students to fight even when they don't want to. They just saw two of their friends die. They need time to heal from their grief and terror, shouted Inko, who had taken her own vows as a teacher very seriously. Not to mention, she still hadn't gotten over the deaths of those two. She has blamed herself countless times for failing them, not knowing what she will tell their parents when they return to Japan. Throughout Inko's long protest, Ishtar had his back turned to her, gazing at the portrait of a hit with a form of reverence. When hearing Inko's words, his gaze was cold and indifferent. This loss was unfortunate indeed, said Ishtar as he lowered his face down and eyes closed, looking remorseful, or at least that's what Inko had thought, but Ishtar's voice showed insincerity. Ishtar was among those who knew about the true nature of a hit. He knew he was nothing more than a pawn, but he was not disheartened in the slightest. Instead, Ishtar was delighted to hear that and devoted himself even further to the cause. To Ishtar, being seen as a pawn to be used is a proof of his value towards the self-proclaimed god of creation Ihit. It meant that he is a valuable pawn, unlike the rest who live and die without knowing the magnificence of his lord. Ishtar had built himself from the ground and became a pope of the largest church just to be of more use to Ihit. If his lord Ihit were to command him to jump from the divine mountain for his entertainment, then he would do so with a smile on his face. To Ishtar, he had really envied the heroes because they were granted divine blessing by Ihit himself. As such, he was very angry and disappointed when they rebelled, with many refusing to fight in spite of being given power. They were ungrateful and didn't deserve to be used as pawns, as they were useless. This was his opinion, but if Ihit wishes for them to stay on the board and entertain him more, then so be it. If that's what you really feel, then you need to stop this right now. If you don't, I won't help on the farms anymore, said Inko, using her own job as a farmer as a leverage to force Ishtar's hands. As if having already anticipated such an outcome, Ishtar turned towards Inko with a calm expression that shows that he was not worried in the least. He already had plans on how to appease this simple-minded woman. Then let me propose this. I promise that those who do not wish to fight will not be forced to do so, said Ishtar as he turned to look at Inko in the eyes, who was surprised. Thank you, said Inko, clearly happy that Ishtar had finally decided to listen to reason. Ishtar then opened his mouth to express the importance of the next word. Lady Inko, your job class, farmer, is incredibly important. We humbly ask that you use your abilities to continue cultivating our farming efforts, said Ishtar in a serious tone while Inko nodded. Excuse me, said Inko, excusing herself before she turned around and left the room as she thought back on how she should have done this from the very start. Ishtar looked once more at the portrait of Ihit, not seeming bored by having to constantly stare at it. Ishtar was truly a religious fanatic who would use those around him if it meant that Ihit would be satisfied with him. He didn't care about those students that refused to fight. Their job class wasn't even that impressive. As long as the hero and those close to him continue to fight, then that's good enough. Izuku felt his whole body being wrapped by something warm and soft. It was a very nostalgic feeling that he hadn't had the privilege of feeling since the last month or so. To be honest, he didn't know how long he was down there to begin with. This is the feeling of a bed. A cushion was gently catching his head and back. The softness of feathers wrapped his body. His dozing consciousness was thrown into confusion. What is this? This is supposed to be the labyrinth. Why is a bed? Izuku thought, but then he remembered how he, Hajime, and you had defeated the final boss of the floor, which was the Hydra. He had dragged Hajime using telekinesis while carrying you in his arms as he walked inside the Oscar lair. He was then welcomed by the ray of the sun, or rather it was an artificial sun, but it was still enough to move anyone who was trapped down there for a month to tears. After wandering around the large place that had a mansion that would make an architect drool, he managed to find a bed in a room where he had placed Hajime in it, who seemed to get even more comfortable. As for him, he had found another bed outside and he didn't think twice before he threw himself in it and slept immediately without a second thought. Izuku couldn't be blamed because he hadn't slept since he first fell down here, so he needed to catch up on all the sleeping he missed. However, he couldn't move his right hand. It was wrapped in a soft feeling that was different from the bed. His palm was also wedged into something warm and soft. What's this? Thought Izuku as he moved his hand while he was still blank. He felt a certain elasticity between his hands and it was squishy when he had touched it. Just keen on the feeling somehow, and it becomes a habit to keep touching. Anyu's stuck gasp reached his ears, which had quickly alarmed Izuku, who noticed as he raised himself in panic. He hadn't paid attention before when he threw himself in the bed, but as he looked at it closely, the bed had a pure white sheet and it felt luxurious, and it even had a canopy. It seems the bed was on a stone pavement in a terrace atrium. A refreshing breeze blew by Izuku's cheeks and the canopy. His perimeter was surrounded by pillars and a thin curtain. Can you imagine a bed in the center of a Parthenon shrine? The whole space was filled with a warm light that he hasn't seen in a long time. Chizuyu's voice whispered in his ears, and it looked like she was having a very pleasant dream, or rather a very lewd dream that involves her and Izuku only. Izuku seems to finally acknowledge your presence next to him. He had actually expected her to sleep next to him, but the reason for his blushing face came from the fact that she was naked and he too was naked. Apparently, the mischievous former vampire queen had decided to strip him completely down. You clinged onto his right hand, which he learned that the elasticity he was feeling from earlier was actually used, but it was one thing if he was taking her lowly form because he could just try to use his own mental strength to resist, since he wouldn't want to be seen as a lolicon, but right now she was sleeping in her adult form, which is an insta-kill. So her assets had gained a massive boost, and so he was currently living every man's dream. Izuku was treated to the sight of her bouncy boo. He was sure that his other former classmates would be shouting for his death at the very moment if they heard that he was having fun, not that he cared. Well, relaxing is part of the process of healing. Izuku justified in his head as to why he wanted to stay inside this bed with this appealing woman whom he had hopelessly fallen in love with. His hand that was journeying to her but stopped as he shifted his body to hug you and pull her closer as he made sure to bury his face in her boot. He too is a healthy teen who had dreamt of waking up to the most appealing women next to him naked. So he was going to enjoy this before she woke up. As expected, having his face buried in those large melons was a new experience all completely. He could already feel his own HP and MP rising and something else that will be left unanswered. You seem to have woken up due to the shifting and noticed Izuku's action, which made her blush, but she was obviously very delighted to see that he loved her melons. She too hugged him, but that only notified Izuku that she had woken up as he looked at her with a blush on his cheeks, looking like a criminal who had just got caught red-handed. Fufu, I'm glad Izuku likes my body. Please enjoy it to your heart's content, for I belong only to you, said Yu seductively. Her voice had obviously changed along with her own appearance. Yu's voice was so alluring that he was sure many would beg her to step on them like ants. She was this type of woman who'd get someone hard just by her voice alone. This is definitely a fantasy world. Banzai, thought Izuku. He was cheering hard in his head due to the words said by the former vampire queen, and he decided to do what he wanted. What a wonderful healing experience, you. Thank you, said Izuku, who for some reason stopped caring. He can't be really accused of anything if nobody knows about it. He gave her a kiss on her lips, which she returned eagerly before he returned to bury his face in her appealing melons. He flinched once he found his mini Yamato being stroked in a subtle way, accompanied by a stuck giggle. This is bad. If this continues, I may not be able to resist to mate with her. Izuku thought he was having very horny thoughts, and he didn't know how long he's going to last. After an hour, Izuku and Yu could be seen sitting on the bed properly. He had gotten somewhat comfortable around Yu's current adult form. Yu sat on his lap with her own BRE pressed against his chest and arm wrapped around his own neck. It was obvious that Yu was enjoying herself far more than one might expect from her. Yu had learned that she can shift between her adult form and her 12-years-old form. They had learned that her adult form was like her combat form, while her lowly form was her suppressed form. Given that she had been on his BLD for who knows how long, her adult form was accompanied by a very large mana pool than in her lowly form. She didn't test this form yet, but just from her intuition, she could tell that her own spells will be far more destructive than normal. So how are you feeling? Asked Izuku as he made a motion at her current adult form. The question was if she intended to stay in this form or switch to her other form. I'm feeling great, but given that this form comes with a large mana pool, I will need to retrain myself in this form, but it will be better to return to my teenage form, Yu explained while Izuku nodded his head in understanding. In other words, her adult form had a lot of benefits in terms of combat, but it was also very destructive, and based on Yu intuition, it will be hard to control her own magic as compared to when she had her normal mana pool, since her spells will be supercharged. They didn't need to go back far. The fight with the Hydra was proof enough of how powerful this form was. She had almost one-shot the Hydra, so that speaks volume of her strength. So unless she can completely control her adult form, then it is best to avoid using it unless the enemy is strong and needs to be crushed. This was Yu's honest assessment, and Izuku agreed with her. Besides, he didn't want many people to see her adult form since it was only for his eyes, and it seems that Yu had noticed and gained a mischievous look, not that she will allow anyone else other than Izuku to touch her. That seems logical enough, said Izuku with a smile, which she returned with her own bewitching smile as they held each other close like a married couple. Izuku, how are you really? Asked Yu curiously while Izuku raised a single eyebrow in confusion at the very odd and out-of-nowhere question. What do you mean? Asked Izuku, confused, while Yu had decided to further elaborate on her question to not cause a misunderstanding. After thinking about it hard, your BLD tasted far more different than anything I've ever tasted, and in a good way. Not only that, the reason why I managed to get this form was due to on your BLD, explained Yu while Izuku pondered on her words. I honestly don't know. Although, if I'm being honest with you, I too don't know if I'm even human anymore. Originally, my hair and eyes were green, but ever since I came here, it was slowly turning to what you see right now. Explained Izuku, which surprised Yu since it was the first time she heard about this. Did you notice anything odd about yourself other than appearance alone? I may be able to know something about it. Asked Yu. She too had wanted to know more about Izuku and the mystery that surrounds him. I remember having a lot of dreams about two people. My status plate had also changed my name for some odd reason, and I'm now Izuku Sparta. I don't really know who this Spar. Izuku was going to continue, but Yu had interrupted him. Sparta, shouted Yu in shock as she heard the name of the legendary Dark Knight Sparta who betrayed the demons and sealed the underworld, becoming a great hero to humanity. Many maidens like you had dreamt of having someone like the Dark Knight Sparta coming in to swoop them from off their ground and save them. She too had dreamt of having a Knight of Sparta to come and save her from her own imprisonment. Yeah. Do you know something, Yu? Asked Izuku, surprised a little about her reaction, but Yu seemed to then shift her attention to the Yamato and she had recognized it. So this is the legendary Dark Slayer sword, Yamato. The sword that was said to have sealed the gates that leads to the underworld. I can't really believe it. I thought there was something very odd with that sword, but you had something that was spoken in legend and regarded as a myth. Shouted Yu in shock before it turned to excitement. Was the unintelligent response that came from Izuku's mouth. He looked at the katana that had made even Hajime shiver and realized how overpowered it is. Suddenly, his confusion was interrupted when you started to kiss him in an aggressive manner, looking like she had already entered heat. The shock of having learned that the one who had saved her was actually a descendant of Sparta had made her very horny. Waiwe! Shouted Izuku in surprise as he saw the look in her eyes as her eyes was replaced with heart, and he knew he was probably going to be raped by her. I've always dreamt of having a Knight of Sparta save me, but I never would have imagined that it would come true. This must be my reward for being a good girl. Said Yu in a dreamy voice as she placed both her hands on her cheeks with a perverted look. Okay, who the hell is Sparta? Asked Izuku, loudly confused as to who is this guy that would make you try to RP him, which surprised you a little, but she understood since Sparta was regarded as a myth and hardly anyone remembered him. Sparta-sama was actually the right-hand man for the Dark Emperor Mundus. He was the most powerful demon swordsman known as the legendary Dark Knight. Spoke Yu as she hornily rubbed herself against Izuku, which had surprised the latter. A demon? Asked Izuku in surprise, and now he felt like he understood a little as to his unnatural growth and odd looks, which you decided to continue even though she was getting impatient and WhatIf. At one point, Sparta-sama had woken up to justice and rebelled against his own kind for the sake of the human race. With his sword, he shut the portal to the demonic realm and sealed the evil entities off from the human world. But since he was a demon himself, his power was also trapped on the other side. Said Yu with deep respect for the man. Wow, that's really hard to believe. Said Izuku, because it was indeed hard to believe. Demons were always viewed as evil, so for his own ancestor to wake up to justice and rebel is unexpected development. Afterwards, he married a human woman and had 2 sons, Dante Sparta as well as Virgil Sparta. Both of them had gone on to surpass their own father and killed Mundus once and for all. Said Yu while Izuku was speechless at what he heard. So those 2 who had appeared in my dreams are possibly Dante and Virgil. Now I know at least what is happening to me. Said Izuku, feeling happy to not be in the dark. Connect to me. Said Yu while Izuku was surprised, but as he looked at her, he couldn't resist the urge to mate with her, and so he let himself go as he pinned her on the bed and kissed her. Lemon warning. Izuku continued to kiss Yu. His hand was roaming all over her body before he reached her own BRST and started to grope them as well as fondle them in his hand, resulting in Yu letting out a stuck Yu wrapped her arms tightly around his neck and her leg around his lower back as she pushed her tongue inside his mouth as they continued to clash against each other heatedly, but Izuku had dominated her much to her delight. Separating from the kiss with a string of saliva connecting, the 2 stared at each other breathlessly as today, the 2 of them were going to lose their own respective virginity to each other. I am really confused about my feelings towards you, but I do know one thing, and that I can't imagine a future without you in it. Will you please make me into the happiest man and become my wife? Asked Izuku, looking her directly in her eyes to convey his true feelings. Ever since he had met her and both their eyes flashed pink and he couldn't get her off his head. She was literally living in his head rent-free at this point, but it's not really a bad thing. Normally, a person with common sense will try to first date the girl he likes to see if the relationship could progress to the next stage or not, but this doesn't really apply to the 2 of them who had gone through life and death. They had been through a lot of hardship in the form of clearing the labyrinth. They stayed together and never abandoned each other even when they faced a powerful opponent they couldn't defeat in the form of the Scorpion and later the Hydra. You couldn't help but let out a small gasp of shock. She didn't expect such a proposal minutes before they had kissed, but this is what made this moment very special. And I'd love too. As long as you're happy with me being your wife. Said you, clearly shy with her cheeks getting rosy from the very sudden marriage proposal. It was funny in a way. Someone like her who won't shy away from having AC was getting shy from a marriage proposal. Even her shy meter had its limit. Then from now on Izuku Midoriya Sparta. Declared Izuku as such. If she is to be his wife, then she will have to take his last name or two last names, which made you even more surprised before she smiled. I really want his babies. You thought obsessively. She contemplated if she should trap him here and live here in Oscar's lair for eternity, but then trapping him here would be difficult. Izuku buried his own face in her neck and started to kiss her neck, making her as she felt him kiss, lick and bite on her neck, which is oddly a very new experience for her. His kisses trailed down to reach in between her valley of Birdi and placed a few kisses there. Seeing her delicious pink areola, he couldn't help but give it a lick before he latched onto it with his mouth on it, which made you Why you really love my bub. I'm so happy, so please enjoy it to your heart's content. Said you through her as she caressed his white hair as Izuku to her other Birdi and repeated the same action as he on it. Izuku could now understand why many people seem to love melons. They were soft and bouncy. It also had a unique taste even if you wasn't actively releasing BRST milk from it. His kiss trailed down once more as he kissed her navel, making her feel very ticklish before he slowly spread her leg to reveal her moist pee-pee that was already leaking from her arsehole. Thank you for the Maya? Izuku was going to dive in, but you had stopped him, which made him confused as he looked at her embarrassed face, but there was also determination. Wait, I can't be the only one who gets to be pleasured like this. Said you, while she did enjoy this, she could see that Izuku was hard and so she too wanted to help. What do you suggest? Asked Izuku, feeling relieved that he didn't overstep or do anything that would make her uncomfortable. You then pinned him on the bed before she sat on his face. Her face was facing directly at his large pee-pee that would make any other man very jealous. It was the 69th position, which Izuku recognized. What? He too is a teenager, so he often got curious and browsed the 18+ section. Now thank you for the meal. Said you herself with a stuck look as she wriggled her hips, which resulted in her pee-pee rubbing against his lips, and he started to eat her, making her Still, determined to pleasure him as well, she dived her own head forward and started to lick the tip of his pee-pee, tasting his pre-cum, which she found to taste good before she lowered her own head with her lips spreading out as she took more of his length inside her mouth and down her throat. Izuku couldn't help but groan. He would admit that he was a little nervous given that the one giving him a BLWJB happened to be a vampire, so he was worried that her fong would scrape against his pages. Or maybe given that she is a vampire known for BLD, they could be a natural-born pee-pee sucker. Thought Izuku in his head. After all, they know how to SCK BLD, so maybe this extends to pages. It somewhat eased his nervousness, and so he resumed eating her out while she too had continued to SCK on his pee-pee with lust in her eyes. With how large it is, you had some form of struggle, but not for long, as she had adapted, and with her automatic regeneration, she was able to bury his pee-pee fully down her throat with her nose touching his pelvis. So tasty, thought you in her mind as she started to bob her head back and forth. She had no prior experience of this, but her body and heart knew what she wanted and guided her. The FRPY had continued for a while. None of them were paying too much attention to their surroundings nor the time. Luckily, Hajime was still sleeping like a rock and wouldn't wake up until probably the next day, or he would have shouted profanities at them. Izuku groaned even more, feeling the build-up. And you had noticed from how his pee-pee was twitching in her mouth, which made her increase the pace out of instinct to taste his seed, while Izuku started to lick her CLT hard and eat her, that she too was reaching her limit. In an instant, Izuku had exploded inside her mouth, causing her to choke in surprise, but she never removed her mouth. Instead, she sealed her lips tightly against his pages. At the same time, she in his mouth, and Izuku was surprised, but he did his part. For a few minutes, the two pleasured each other orally, with one can hear you slurping noises as she dutifully his semen dry and Izuku had her clean. The two breathed out, feeling the fresh air enter their noses and mouths as you had a satisfied look on her face. What next? Asked Izuku, He wanted to let you guide the pace, but it seemed the former vampire queen had also reached her limit and wanted to get to the main event. "We may," said Yu bluntly as she adjusted her body with her PP hovering on top of his pages. Izuku blushed but was determined to finally graduate and become a man. Slowly, she let herself descend slowly with his PP stretching her PP as it continued inside her before reaching a barrier. With biology classes being a very mandatory course in their own middle school, Izuku knew this was the barrier that once breached would result in a woman losing her virginity. Yu stopped as she looked at him with love, knowing that this was it. She didn't show any hesitation before letting herself fall as the PP pierced her hymen, resulting in BLD to leak out. Despite knowing this was normal for a woman to leak out BLD from their vagina after losing their virginity, Izuku couldn't help but look worried at her since he could see her writhe in pain. "Are you okay?" asked Izuku as he looked at Yu, who raised her head to look at him with tears in the corner of her eyes. It wasn't tears of pain but joy. "And I am okay. I'm just happy. The pain is nothing compared to what I had experienced in the past," said Yu softly. It was true, Yu had experienced decapitation among other things in the past, so this was nothing. Izuku smiled as he hugged her, pulling her closer with her BT squishing against his chest. Her face buried in his neck as she inhaled his scent as they simply enjoyed this simple moment together. "She's tight," thought Izuku in his head as he wondered what it would have been like if he had SC with her when she was in her lowly form. Would she have been even tighter? He shook his head as he banished said thoughts. This question would be the equivalent to admitting that he's a lolicon. He is no lolicon. Then again, Yu is 300 years old, so he can't be labeled as one. Besides, Inko Hatayama, his social studies teacher, was actually 25 years old and she looks like a child and acts like one. His own world is also dominated by those quirks, so someone who has the appearance of a child is no surprise. Yu started to move her hips, with Izuku also doing the same by his hips forward. You couldn't help but seductively. The pain was already gone and was replaced with the pleasure. "Wire big?" Yu, as she could feel the tip of his own PP already kissing her CRVX, with the possibility of him breaching her uterus and being inside her. Izuku couldn't help but unconsciously puff his chest in pride as a man. As time had passed, the pace had started to increase from just a moderate pace to a full-blown ZC, with the clapping noises of their flesh touching each other. Yu's also increased as a result. "Kiss me, Yu," which Izuku complied with by grabbing both her face as he kissed her passionately. Izuku's hand occasionally gave her but a firm squeeze, enjoying how she would tighten around his PP as a result. As minutes passed, the two already found themselves reaching their limits, and any minute and they will have their first orgasm. Their lovemaking had continued intensely and Yu became louder. I love you, Yu happily as she rode him. She felt a sense of excitement when she realized that Izuku was going to come at any moment and she too was nearing her limits. She desperately wanted to orgasm alongside him. In order to prevent him from pulling out of her PP, she locked both her legs around his lower back, determined to feel his seed in the deepest part of her womb. "I love you too," said Izuku, reciprocating the feeling as he hugged her tightly while burying his face in her large melons, knowing that he too was reaching his own limits. A few more and before long the two hard with him, emptying himself deep inside her as they held on to each other tightly, enjoying the great feeling, with Yu spasming hard along with her orgasm, making her blank out for a moment. Following his own instinct, Izuku bit Yu's neck, surprising her as she let out a loud before he pulled back with BLD in his mouth and a confused look. You couldn't help but smile from ear to ear as she knew what he did. He had marked her as his and his alone. Izuku then pinned Yu on the bed, wanting to be the one on the top, probably due to his pride as a man that wouldn't allow a woman to be at the top. Yu didn't mind as she knew just the first round of their lovemaking. Lemon ending. Izuku and Yu both laid on the bed. The sky had already turned dark, showing that they've been going at it for hours or almost the entire day. Regardless, the two were quite satisfied with their lovemaking. "We overdid it, didn't we?" Izuku asked as he scratched the back of his head. Having SEC for hours or for an entire day was abnormal, since normal humans shouldn't last that long. This is normal. Human mating is fundamentally different from races such as ours. You'll learn eventually that we tend to enjoy having SXL NTRCers more than normal. explained Yu in a softer tone while Izuku nodded in understanding. Yu then gained a stuck mix with a perverted look as she crawled over his chest and placed a kiss on his lips which he quickly returned. Her large breast was pressed against his chest and he felt he may get hard again. For that reason, if you ever feel like you want to bend me over and ravage my body to your heart's content, then do not hesitate. Remember, my body is yours, said Yu while Izuku blushed. I understand, said Izuku with a blush on his face. Yu saying something like that was pushing his buttons while Yu herself smiled happily at hearing his response. I never thought I'd zing in a place like this. Now I'm no longer really upset anymore about being betrayed by my uncle, said Yu with a content smile while Izuku looked at her curiously. Zing. What's that? Asked Izuku while Yu turned to look at him with a very appealing smile on her face. She didn't blame him for not knowing since it was really uncommon for it to happen. Zing is what humans would call as love at first sight, which only happens when a person meets his or her soulmate with whom they will spend eternity with, explained Yu, which surprised Izuku upon hearing that. Didn't you feel as if your eye flashed pink all of a sudden? This is a zing. So even if you were to take another lover, you may love them but not to the same extent as with the person who you zinged with, explained Yu while Izuku remembered. I see, so that time was when I zinged with you. Well, I guess that's fine, said Izuku with a smile, partly relieved that he wasn't quick to fall in love with some pretty women. It will be an issue if that was the case, because if there is anything he had learned from his years of experience in being in Aldra is that women can sometimes be cruel even more than boys. While guys would just verbally abuse you or try to harm you physically, but those are just typical and expected of them. Besides, he had dealt with Katsuki from kindergarten up to 1 or 2 years in Aldra before he moved to a new middle school. He was sure that no one could ever top what Katsuki had done to him back in Aldra. Katsuki had used his quirk, explosion, to leave him with severe burns and even wounds by the end of the day. So his new middle school was far better since they had stricter quirk rules, so he only ever received taunts or getting pushed. As for girls, he had met those who led him on to believe that they like him only to brutally reveal to him that they never liked him and were just toying with him, which often left him crushed and with low self-confidence, which is why he had issues with girls in general. Those girls had no life, they simply had too much time in their hands to bully others and lead him on. Which is why he never really pursued any relationship with girls because of his trauma, although he did overcome it, but that's beside the point. Still, he is glad that his and Yu's relationship has a meaning. This was a quite genuine relationship between two people who love each other, so Yu is more than enough for him to live happily. I can't wait to introduce her to Mom, thought Izuku in his head. He could imagine his mom fainting after she learns that her son had married a literal queen. You really slept like a baby, said Izuku as he hovered over Hajime, who was sleeping with the bed sheet covering up to his nose, looking like Kakashi from Naruto when he was healed by Tsunade. Hajime narrowed his left eye to his best friend, clearly unbothered by the fact that his right eye was already gone as it was bandaged by a freshly new white bandage, as Izuku had decided to treat him when he was sleeping at one point, while also cleaning his upper body with a wet cloth just to disinfect any wound. Although Izuku was doubtful that the concept of infection was going to be an issue given that Hajime was now a hybrid monster, so he had acquired quite a lot of resistance and he was a demon or maybe even a hybrid one, but better be safe than sorry. Excuse me for wanting to sleep after fighting that if Hydra be the way. You're welcome, said Hajime. It was obvious that he was making a jab at the fact that he went solo on the Hydra for a few minutes after he got knocked out for a while. Now, don't be grumpy like that. It doesn't suit you. Then again, you've always been into edgelord characters, so I wouldn't be surprised if you became one, said Izuku mockingly while Hajime got veins throbbing in his head. This was just their normal banter between best friends. They knew there was nothing harmful, they were just messing with each other with words alone. Not to mention, banters like this is what makes them stay human. I'm not an edgelord, shouted Hajime as he sat properly and noticed that he was half naked. He still had worn his from before, but his top clothes were removed and instead he could see his bandaged chest. Also, why am I half naked? Asked Hajime while Izuku couldn't help but give him a deadpan look at the stupid question. Why would a person remove his clothes unless, of course, for medical purposes? I stripped you myself the previous day in order to bandage you unless you really like to sleep in your own sweat and monster BLD, said Izuku in a nonchalant manner while Hajime nodded his head in acceptance. Maybe it's because he was half naked that he had slept better. The shirt and jacket were already quite stuffy to begin with, so he didn't care much that he was stripped during his sleep, although he was glad that his weren't also removed. Let's leave that aside. For now I've brought you some clothes other than the ones you currently wear. Also, me and you happen to have run into a bath on the ground floor, said Izuku as he tossed Hajime many clothes that he could choose from. Izuku currently wore a dark blue buttoned shirt accompanied by a white with a black belt. He also wore brown boots to complete his looks. A certain demon king of tyranny would definitely be proud of Izuku for the good taste. The bath. How long has it been since I've taken one? I will head down there, said Hajime energetically as he picked a few clothes from the pile that Izuku had brought to him. It was just a simple brown shirt and dark brown with a belt. He planned to put Donner on the back looking like one of those Yakuza who'd pull just a gun from inside there to shoot. Hajime then turned to gaze at Izuku with an expectant gaze, knowing that Izuku had something to say. He could already guess that Izuku had done more than just enjoy a hot bath, but rather he probably looked around. Me and you have looked around Oscar Mansion and found there are 3 floors to this house. The library and the workshop were the only ones that we couldn't access unless we had the keys to it, explained Izuku while Hajime nodded his head. That aside, we found some sort of a throne room on the 3rd floor with the corpse of the Maverick himself as well as a magic circle in front of it. Me and you haven't done anything yet since we decided to wait until you woke up, said Izuku while Hajime nodded. Well, let's postpone the bath thing. I want to see what's this all about. Maybe this could tell us the exit as well, said Hajime. The whole point of going down there was to find an exit in the first place. I figured you'd say that. Let's go, said Izuku as he walked outside while Hime clicked his tongue repeatedly as he discarded his and wore the new clothes. He walked out of the room to be met by Yu as well, but this time the former vampire queen was in her lowly form as he and Izuku had dubbed it, since it was technically her form when she was 12 years old before she stopped aging. Didn't you just earlier transform into an adult woman? Asked Hajime in confusion, since Hajime had clearly remembered how you transformed and overpowered the Hydra with a single attack. I do have it, but I much prefer this one given how easier it is to control my magic, said Yu simply while Hajime reluctantly nodded his head in acceptance to the answer. Think of her adult form as a battle form, said Izuku, speaking the language of every otaku, which Hajime immediately understood the meaning behind as he looked at Yu momentarily before nodding his head. It was like that Isekai novel he had recently picked up, which is That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime, where the white ice dragon Velzard has her own concealed form which takes the form of a young girl while also having her true form or battle form that give her the appearance of a mature woman. I see, that seems logical enough, said Hajime while Yu was somewhat surprised seeing that Hajime understood from Izuku's small sentence, but then again Hajime always striked her as a smart person. Now then, it's best if we head to that throne room, said Izuku while the two nodded as they didn't waste any time and started to head towards the room that both Izuku and Yu had found. Hajime, who was unfamiliar with the lair, walked slowly before he stopped to look at a window which showed sunlight. Opening the window, he couldn't help but smile as he saw the ray of suns peeking through. The sun. No, it couldn't be, muttered Hajime to himself as they were still deep inside the labyrinth, most importantly in the home of Oscar Orcus, one of the Mavericks who rebelled against the gods. It's an artificial sky from what we can tell. During nighttime, you will see the sky become dark. I have to admit, that Oscar guy is a MSTR of his craft if he was able to create something like this, said Izuku, giving praise where it's due. Hajime felt his muscles somewhat relax seeing the sun, even if it was artificial as Izuku had said, but being met with light was better than the dark and creepy place that was the lower floor of the labyrinth. After that, the group continued forward with them, keeping a moderate pace out of consideration to Hajime, who was unfamiliar with the place and as such needed time to look around. They ran into the bath along the way, which Hajime couldn't help but check the water temperature with his hand, and surprisingly, despite how long this place was left without any visitors, the water temperature was at an appropriate one where one can enjoy themselves. I will have to take a long one at night, said Hajime as he pulled his hand from the water and turned towards the two who patiently waited for him as they moved once more towards the staircase. As they climbed the third floor of the mansion, several crystals on the wall started to emit a glow that allowed them to see around as it helped guide them towards a small room which had the appearance of a throne room. Almost like he was waiting for someone, said Hanmei, whose eyes fell on the skeleton/corpse of the maverick who looked like he was expecting someone to come here. This is definitely a fantasy world, said Izuku while Hajime couldn't help but nod in his head in agreement. This was a scene they've seen quite a few times in manga and other novels. At the center of the room, there was a circular magic circle which they're supposed to walk into. Hajime looked hesitant since they still didn't know what would happen if they walked inside the magic circle. This room's gotta be the key to finding a route to the surface. You two, help me out if this goes south, said Hajime as he turned towards the two while they nodded their heads. Be careful, said Yu, nodding her head. Hajime was still an important friend who had helped save her even though he was reluctant and against her being released at the start. Sure, in case you die, what would be your last will? Asked Izuku in a very cheerful voice as he pulled a pen and a notebook while Hanmei got veins popping in his head. Go ahead. Do you want me to delete that gentleman folder for you, or better yet the darkness of my soul folder? Asked Izuku, making Hajime face contort to shock. How in the hell do you know about those? Shouted Hajime. Those folders contain his dark secrets that he hid and even put a passcode on so that no one would be able to access it. Those folders happen to have 18+ pictures and even files that Hajime would rather shoot himself to death than to have someone find it. Those folders contain his dark secrets and his dark legacy. Details. I've only those folders were just open and I saw them. Now then, if you were to die, I'd like to have those limited edition manga since I don't have any of those, and also I want, said Izuku in a shameless manner, but he was interrupted with two loud bangs. Dopan. Dopan. Hajime didn't hesitate to fire 2 bullets at Izuku, with the 2 bullets hitting both his chest while Izuku in exaggerated manner his body like how those action movies do when someone is shot. Izuku! Shouted Yu in shock as she saw Izuku being shot and glared at Hajime for what he had done. Even if Izuku is technically like her, but still it took her off guard and it was unexpected while Hajime looked coldly. Take those to your grave. I will make sure to remember you forever, my dear best friend who ran his tongue too much, said Hajime with tears of blood in his eyes, although he knew this wasn't going to kill him. Sorry to run in your parade, but I'm not dead, said Izuku with a cackle as he sat properly, pulling the 2 bullets from his own chest, and he started to heal instantly. Even if Hajime were to actually shoot him in the head, he will still live. Don't you ever dare mention those ever again. You will take them to your grave, you hear me? Shouted Hajime threateningly as he pointed the muzzle of the gun at Izuku, who waved both his hands like some criminal who got told to raise his hand, but it was a mocking one. Yes. Why are you so upset? I'm giving you the opportunity to write your own final will. Don't you want to take the entire computer down with you to the grave? Asked Izuku with a raised eyebrow while Hajime blushed. Don't speak such nonsense, I won't die, shouted Hajime as he huffed and walked towards the magic circle, which started to glow red while you checked on Izuku, seeing that he was okay and unharmed. Izuku wasn't really offended in the least by Hajime shooting him. The two had already lost their common sense down in the labyrinth, so shooting each other was the equivalent of a playful wrestling or a playful punch on the shoulder. Hajime froze as he grabbed his head as if he was being poked all over by a lot of needles. His memory was currently being reviewed by the magic circle. Then, a ghost-like figure had stood up from the throne room revealing Oscar Orcus, but this was a holographic, a recording that he made before his death. Hajime instinctively reached for Donner on his back, ready to defend, and so did Izuku, who was holding onto the Yamato. My name is Oscar Orcus. I am the man who built this labyrinth. You've done well to survive my trials and make it here. Oscar introduced himself to the group while Izuku grip slightly eased on the Yamato. The term Maverick should be familiar to you, yes? Asked Oscar, but it was a holographic, so he had no way of knowing who was before him since this was only a recording. So you're him, muttered Hajime mostly to himself as he remembered what you had said about the Mavericks who had rebelled against the gods and built the labyrinths that were scattered across the planet. Sorry, but you'll have to hold off on questions. This is just a recording after all. Unfortunately, I can't answer your questions. Oscar said as if anticipating that the labyrinth conqueror would have questions. I just wanted to leave a message for the person who made it here, to share the reasons why someone who knew the truth of this world chose to fight against it, said Oscar with a gentle tone. I don't know who you are or why you came here, but there's something I want you to know. I will give you my power. Use it as you please. Just please don't use it for evil, said Oscar, who now stood facing Hajime. Power? Asked Hajime, not expecting that he will get some power from all of this, but maybe it will be beneficial if he gains something to help him to return back home. That's all. Thank you for listening. I hope you will be able to live by your own free will, said Oscar before he vanished, while Hajime suddenly felt another pulse in his head and grabbed onto his head. What's happening? It's like something is being imprinted onto my mind, said Hajime as he let out a few groans of pain, or rather it looked like he was trying to poop before the magic circle stopped glowing. Holy Estish, said Hajime, who finally realized that those Mavericks weren't some evil people but rather they were liberators who tried to free this world from the tyranny of the gods. What did you see? I asked Izuku as he narrowed his eyes, realizing that Hajime must have seen something. They weren't evil gods, or Mavericks, they were liberators, explained Hajime as he turned towards Izuku and Yu while the latter looked confused. What now? Asked Yu. She didn't know much of the details, but she knew that this changed everything. Will they fight against a Hit and Alva or not? We told you before, we don't give a CRP about what happens to this world. We're going home. That's it, said Hajime in a firm tone while Izuku nodded his head in agreement. Although Izuku had some doubts. Going home won't be easy as it sounds. There are also a lot of things that they need to take into account. If the gods are evil, then there will definitely be agents that will simply try to stop them from returning. It wouldn't be a surprise if he hit himself were to come down to pick a fight with them. But those were just mere speculation and he doesn't know if it will actually come into fruition, but it's better to be prepared for the worst-case scenario. You worried about it? Asked Hanyu while Yu shook her own head as she grabbed Izuku's hand, who looked at her, but he nonetheless held her hand tightly in his own hand. I belong here. I don't care about anything else. Yu expressed her true feelings that as long as Izuku wishes it, then she will be more than happy to follow him around. Oh, also it seems like I've learned a new kind of magic, ancient magic, said Hajime as he looked away awkwardly. It didn't take a genius for Hajime to figure out the relationship between the two. Is that so? Hopefully, we can also have ancient magic as well, said Izuku as he and Yu walked towards the magic circle. Since Hajime was on it, it won't glow for now. It's called creation magic. It lets me add energy to raw minerals to give them special qualities, explained Hajime while Yu looked mildly surprised. You can make artifacts? Asked Yu while Hajime nodded his head, as this was ancient magic suited for a synergist like himself, so Hajime was pleased with the new power-up. Yeah, it seems like it, said Hajime with a smile. He was already thinking of the things he can do with the new ancient magic he acquired that would help him in the journey. That's pretty cool. We've already seen artifacts in the Highlight Kingdom and some of them are decently good, but with our knowledge of Earth, we can create something far better than those junks in the kingdom, said Izuku while Hajime couldn't help but agree. After Yu and Izuku had both acquired the ancient magic, creation, and also got information on the liberators, the two of them decided to test their new ancient magic up until night. Izuku seems to be good at it, but not at the same level as Hajime, who had the convenient job of synergist. Even then he can create his own artifact, given that he was far smarter than Hajime himself. Yu was the one who found it difficult because she was a magician. How's it going? Learn how yet? Asked Hajime, who stood up with a yawn as he looked at the two who went off a few hours ago to test the ancient magic. It was already night at this point and the artificial sky became dark, showing also a moon. I did, but artifacts are hard, said Yu. She had quite a lot of difficulty using it, but she was not discouraged that much because she could already tell that she wouldn't have talent for it. It was a little easier for me than with you, but I don't think I will need to use it. Creation magic seems to be more compatible for you given your synergist job, so good for you, said Izuku with a smile, not really that upset. In any case, this place is ours now, so why don't we take care of the corpse? Asked Hajime as he turned to look at the corpse of Oscar Orcus while the two others nodded. Use it to fertilize the fields? Said Yu as she too looked at the corpse, but Izuku was opposed to this. He may have changed down there, but he would not do something so low. Oh. Let's give him a proper burial instead. This is the least we can do for someone who granted us ancient magic, so let's not spit on the dead, said Izuku while the two others flinched. Izuku walked over to the corpse and saw the ring which he pulled out and tossed it to Hajime, who caught it. They looked at him confused given that Izuku's earlier words contradict his action. Don't look at me like that. That ring is purposefully left on his finger for a reason. Not to mention, that ring is what's going to allow us to access the sealed rooms, said Izuku, which surprised the two, and you remembered. I do happen to remember one of those sealed doors having the ring symbol engraved on it, said Yu while Hajime clenched his hand on the ring before pocketing it. It was the next day that they had found a very suitable and nice place to bury Oscar before giving a prayer. Mostly it was Izuku's insistence to show a little bit more respect to the dead, and the other two followed behind him for their own reasons. After that, the three had decided to move towards the library, and they walked inside where there was a white sheet of paper that was neatly placed on the table that shows how to access the sealed rooms and how to especially leave the labyrinth. Just like Izuku had predicted, there was a design of the same ring that Oscar had worn on his finger before they took it for themselves and buried Oscar's corpse outside. Looks like that magic circle is connected to the surface, said Hajime as he observed the notes on the paper sheet that showed the design and function of the ring. But to connect it, we need Orcus ring, said Yu as she looked at Hajime, who had rummaged through his pocket and pulled the ring that Izuku had given him earlier. So the workshop's full of Oscar's artifacts and all his material, huh? We'd better take him with us, said Hajime with a grin on his face. He could feel his synergist BLD boiling with excitement. Izuku, look, said Yu as she came back with a book, but it was not a normal one, but rather it was Oscar's diary from when he was living in the labyrinth, while Izuku's interest got piqued as a result. Izuku took the diary as he sat on the chair in front of the desk and opened it with Yu, who had taken her lowly form, had sat on his lap with her right arm around his shoulder. Izuku's left hand wrapped around her left shoulder and pulled her closer with her head resting on his chest as they looked at the diary. Hajime grunted, but he stood up and leaned from the other side to get a good look at the content of the diary. I figured this would be the case. The other labyrinths are trials similar to this one, but that mostly depends on each liberator, and those that conquer the labyrinths are rewarded with ancient magic, said Izuku with excitement. So if we manage to make it through the other labyrinths, we'll get our hands on ancient magic, and one of those can be. Hajime spoke, and you decided to continue in his place. You may find a way back home, said Yu in a low voice, but the two heard her clearly. It was possible as Izuku turned to pages and contemplated on what he learned. It's possible. According to Oscar's notes, each ancient magic governs one core aspect of existence. There are creation magic, gravity magic, spatial magic, restoration magic, spirit magic, evolution magic, metamorphosis magic, said Izuku as he mentioned the 7 ancient magic while humming thoughtfully. What do you think, Izuku? Asked Yu with a smile. She could tell that there was something on his mind, and Hajime also looked at Izuku, acknowledging that he was the smartest. Actually, my theory is that there could be an additional ancient magic. Izuku, which made them raise an eyebrow in confusion since it was not really mentioned. What makes you think there is an additional ancient magic? Asked Hane while Izuku, who had a thoughtful look, seemed to have gained a steely gaze. All ancient magic mentioned so far doesn't seem to be really related to world traveling. This leads me to believe that by combining all ancient magic, a new ancient magic is created from it. Explained Izuku his own theory while you seem to have an idea. It's like combining 2 spells together to create composite magic, said Yu, who was the magic expert and as such had combined spells before in the past, which is what made her a terrifying opponent. That's precisely correct. It could be that they know or may not know, given that each of the liberators only used one ancient magic. This is just a mere speculation, but I bet this will be the case," said Izuku with confidence that his theory is correct. "As expected of you. We'll just have to clear the other labyrinth and test that theory out unless we can gain confirmation," said Hajime, feeling a little bit of hope welling up in his chest. 1 month had passed ever since the group of 3 had made the Oscar labyrinth as their base of operation. Hajime, who had managed to access the workshop, could only salivate at the blueprints of many of Oscar's projects, with the one that caught his attention the most being the golems. Izuku, on the other hand, didn't really particularly need to create anything with creation magic, and instead he prioritized knowledge. To Izuku, going on in the world with no knowledge is like running with your eyes. It won't work that way. He had read Oscar's diary extensively. Of course, he could tell that Oscar had omitted a few things and only ever talked about things like his relationship with the other liberators such as 𝐒𝐻𝐸𝐸, 𝐒𝐻𝐸𝐸, and the other liberators. He had also learned about this weird hate-slash-love relationship between him and one of the liberators named Vander Schnee due to their different opinion on art. Oscar and Vander were basically this world version of Sasori and Deidara from Naruto Shippuden. Izuku didn't learn much, but the diary did confirm quite a few of his theories, such as the fact that 𝐒𝐻𝐸𝐸 had something akin to the royal guards that does his own bidding, which are the apostles of God, that possess enough combat prowess to fight 3 liberators and almost take them down. Izuku knew he was strong to the point of being abnormal. Even Hajime, who is already a monster, was not as strong as him. Izuku had 2 things he excels at the most, and that would be his speed. Both skills, Blink Strike and Flashing Strike, combined together are enough to make him into a true menace to this world. Blink Strike enhanced his legs to move at a speed faster than light, and it also has several derivatives that are equally powerful and dangerous. Flashing Strike is a combat-oriented version of the Blink Strike, as it similarly enhances his body to the point of being able to draw his sword faster than the speed of light. Even then, speed alone isn't the only factor to win a fight. Those speed feats may sound awesome at first glance, but it requires stamina and magic. For the Apostle of Gods, Izuku had learned that they have a special mana crystal that gives them unlimited mana. Not to mention, disintegration, a skill that can melt anything upon contact, is extremely dangerous, especially if they can coat their respective weapons with it, which would make being touched by them dangerous. If they can manipulate disintegration to, let's say, coat it around their body to make it impossible to touch, or mold it to shape weapons such as chains made out of disintegration, then Izuku himself isn't very confident that he can win, so he needs to be stronger. Aside from gaining knowledge on the world of Tortus beyond what Izuku had managed to learn from the kingdom, who either hid the truth or didn't have any accurate representation of history, given the fact that 𝐒𝐻𝐸𝐸 had been purging a lot of people in the past, Izuku had also managed to learn a few magic spells from Yu herself. He had to admit that her own method of teaching is very hard to grasp, because even Hajime had given up at one point, but Izuku had managed to understand, which seemed to shock Hajime and made Yu happy. In order to better understand Yu, Izuku had to first learn magic theory to understand those ratios and numbers that she kept throwing around during her explanation, but at the end he managed to grasp everything she said to him eventually. Still, Izuku wasn't aiming to be magician since he was a swordsman, so he aimed to learn a few spells from each type of magic and also created a few magic spells, or rather it already existed, but they were techniques he saw in his dreams. Aside from that, he had trained in his swordsmanship, working on his stamina so he can use his skills to its fullest potential, albeit Yu, when learning of his stamina training, had a stuck look, and it was then that Yu had suggested her own training, which she calls bed training or bed spar. He couldn't resist, and as such every night they had their special training, which is something the 2 of them enjoyed greatly, and at one point they also had one early in the morning. What is it?" Hajime asked. Annoyance can be clearly seen in his face and heard from his own voice. This is because Izuku had dragged him from the workshop. Izuku shook his head in displeasure. Hajime had apparently fallen in love with Oscar's workshop to the point that he and Yu had forgotten that he was there to begin with because of how absent he was from their daily life, and as such Hajime was dragged out of the workshop many times. Izuku had seen Hajime with that deranged look, and the last thing Izuku wants is for his best friend to become insane. He looked like a typical mad scientist, or is it a mad synergist? I'm suggesting training exercises, and if my theory is correct, you may reach a new level, and so will I," said Izuku, getting to the point while Hajime's curiosity piqued. So what is that theory of yours? Asked Hajime, seriously, not to be sarcastic, because he knows about Izuku's notebook and had seen its content, which terrified him if he was being honest. Now you've been working as of lately on aerial reloading and you've actually it. But the issue is that the opponents that we'll face are faster, and it wouldn't be a surprise if they can just dodge the bullets, said Izuku seriously while Hajime sighed. Then if that's the case, I will have to create a weapon that could shoot bullets faster, or something like 𝐒𝐻𝐸𝐵, said Hajime bluntly. To Hajime, if something doesn't work, then he will have to come with something even better. Izuku shook his head with a sigh. This type of thinking is similar to, if that hit doesn't hurt him, then I will hit him even harder. It's basically something he expects All Might to do. 𝐒𝐻𝐸𝐵. Ignoring your naming sense. You misunderstand what I'm trying to tell you, so I won't beat around the bush. Have you never thought of making living bullets? Asked Izuku while Hajime looked confused. Living bullets? Hajime quizzically asked. He was rather confused by what he meant, but he had an idea of what Izuku was trying to tell him. Bullet manipulation. You remember Whole Horse from JoJo, don't you? Asked Izuku to use his otaku knowledge to communicate with another otaku, and it seemed that Hajime's face lightened up in recognition. Or better yet, we have the hero Snipe. His quirk is called homing, Izuku said once more while Hajime recognized the name of the pro hero even if he wasn't popular. Okay, I get it, said Hajime. A grin involuntarily made its way on his face. As he thought about it, the idea was genius. He didn't know why he never thought about it. Hajime then pulled both pairs of technomagical revolvers from the back of his left arm that was cut off at the lower floor was now replaced with a prosthetic arm that is metallic. Hajime still felt uncomfortable at the moment, but the massage that Izuku gave him regularly helped his body get used to the new foreign arm. So along the way, he had created a second revolver which he named 𝐒𝐻𝐸𝐵. In order for this training to work, you'll try to shoot me and my goal is to dodge. You've managed to evolve some of your skills during a battle crisis where you're near death or due to frustration, said Izuku as he dodged rapidly just in time. *Dopan. *Dopan. You're good, said Hajime nonchalantly while pointing the muzzle of the two revolvers at Izuku, who had gotten annoyed. Izuku had expected that Hajime would shoot regardless, but whatever. You beat, said Izuku, annoyed while Hajime grinned, but then Izuku's expression became malicious, which sent shivers down Hajime's spine as he knew he f up. If there is one thing he learned about the GNU Izuku is that once he holds a grudge against someone, he won't let it go and will be very petty. Izuku in an instant was onto Hajime and slapped him at the back of his head, causing his head to kiss the concrete floor. Not giving him a chance, Izuku grabbed him by his leg and hoisted him in the air, but Hajime retaliated by shooting real bullets at Izuku. Only to add salt to the wound, Izuku had catched the bullet using his teeth and started to spin Hajime in the air before letting his leg go. This caused Hajime to be sent flying in the air, spinning as he let out a scream that attracted Yu's attention, who watched from far away, snickering a little at Hajime's expense. Hajime managed to regain his bearing as he landed on the ground on both his feet, using aerodynamic to make the landing. Hajime looked with his one eye gleaming red from rage, and he started to shoot bullets at Izuku as fast as he possibly could. Unfortunately, those bullets were rather slow to catch someone as fast as Izuku, so all he could do was try to catch him, but Izuku wasn't making it any easier for him to catch him as he skillfully maneuvered even when in air and dodged the bullets. To make Hajime grow, Izuku intends to piss him off and frustrate him to force him to develop skills preferable to living bullets. Izuku had reappeared before Hajime while letting out an intimidating yell that sent Hajime panicking as he tripped on his back. You shouldn't be enjoying tormenting me, shouted Hajime with rage as he started to put even more effort into this, not caring if he had to unload the entire magazine of bullets on Izuku's head, knowing that the BSTRD will still survive. Well, you're too slow to catch me, you might as well be a snail, said Izuku mockingly as he placed one finger and did an eyelid pull or a canby while pulling out his tongue. Are you a DMN child? Shouted Hajime as he started to shoot bullets after bullets while Izuku smirked as he skillfully dodged and even started to dance, making Hajime irritation increase. You haven't seen what I can do as of yet? said Izuku as he appeared before Hajime while sliding in between his open leg while at the same time pulling his down. Kaya. Hajime let out a not-so-manly scream as he started to pull his up-to-save face. Yu, who was watching from afar, giggled at seeing Hajime being tormented, clearly enjoying this. That's such a girly scream right there, said Izuku, leaning with his body weight as his voice was dripping with mockery and sarcasm, which made Hajime even more angered. You're so dead, shouted Hajime as he pulled flash grenades and started to throw them at Izuku, who was surprised, which exploded. Hajime proceeded to shoot bullets, emptying the entire gun of the ammo. Wow, you really got him, said Izuku with a fake surprise tone as his hand was draping over Hajime's shoulder, who turned to look at Izuku in surprise while Izuku grinned maliciously at him. This training had continued for another month, making it where 2 months had already passed for the group of 3. Hajime, despite his frustration, had managed to achieve the goal and developed a new separate skill. The skill name is Pursuit, which allows Hajime's bullet to continuously follow the target until it hits them, which Hajime had to admit was very useful in the battle. During their spar, Hajime had managed on a few occasions to actually hit him, although they had quickly learned that there was a limit to Hajime's Pursuit skill. Hajime had a limited bullet he could control because if he didn't have such a limit, then if he used something like 𝐒𝐻𝐸𝐵, which he learned was a Gatling gun that Hajime had created, then Izuku would have been in serious trouble since his body would have been riddled with bullets. Still, as a result of Hajime's growth, he naturally also grew in terms of speed, so both of them had technically helped each other advance, and Hajime was quite satisfied even though he still was extremely at Izuku for the stunts that were pulled on him. Izuku currently sat in the hot bath of the Oscar lair. It was night and the next day was going to be their last day in this place before they have to make their way out of the labyrinth and go on their adventure journey. Splash! He could hear someone entering the water, but he knew that it was Yu since they had always bathed together. She looked at him with a smile as she stood naked. She was still in her little form, which Izuku didn't mind. Izuku smiled and pulled her into his arms, which she allowed herself as she snuggled into his arms with a comfortable sigh. On her finger was a gleaming ring because at one point, Izuku had created for her a ring and gave it to her. It was obviously made out of the 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐸𝐵 crystal, which is very popular among the nobles as a crystal that is used on engagement rings. Yu's face that day when he got on one knee and proposed to her was priceless. That day, Yu never let him leave the bed, not that he wanted to leave. Hajime learned about it and gave the congratulation, but he could tell that his best friend was uncomfortable, not out of jealousy but rather because he had not really expected the relationship between him and Yu would escalate to the point that he would outright ask her hand in marriage. Nonetheless, Hajime had shrugged his shoulders. He was far more focused on his goals than to pursue relationships, albeit he was more into rabbit men because he found their rabbit ears to be cute and even wondered what it's like to touch them. Besides, he and Yu were not particularly close to begin with since he was against her being released at the start. Even after she was released, they didn't talk much with each other, so Hajime was not really that upset over the relationship. Tomorrow is finally it, said Yu in a soft voice as she hugged Izuku tightly, feeling happy. Tomorrow is the day that she will leave this labyrinth after 300 years of imprisonment. Albeit, she had contemplated on more than one occasion to confine him here in the lair and let Hajime leave so he wouldn't get in the way. Then, she would spend the rest of eternity with Izuku and have his babies, something she had written extensively in her own private diary that was filled with her obsession over Izuku. Yes. Time sure does run fast when you're not actively thinking about it, said Izuku as these 2 months felt like it had just gone in a blink of an eye. Once they get outside, they'll be exposed to the dangers once more. Izuku looked at Yu, who was giving a loving gaze which made him smile as he leaned his head against her with their nose touching. His hand caressed her cheek gently before he pressed his lips against her. Yu kissed back, pushing her tongue against his own as they made out in the bath. His hand roamed all over her petite body while she did the same as she roamed her own hand across his chest, abs, and even his back as their kiss became intense. Separating from the kiss, the two gazed at each other lovingly as he stroked her face gently before burying his face in her neck, inhaling her scent while placing a few kisses then and there all over her neck, making her release a little from her lips. I can't wait to introduce you to my mom and even take you on dates around my hometown, Maybe even go on a honeymoon around the world, just the two of us without any distraction? Said Izuku while Yu's cheeks reddened from happiness. She could already imagine it. Her and Izuku are alone together with no insects daring to get in the way of their happy life. Her smile couldn't be more evident than now, as it was obvious from her expression that she was daydreaming. I look forward to this, said Yu. Her voice shows excitement at what she and Izuku will do together once they're out of this world and back to his world, which is Earth. She doesn't really hold any particular attachment to this world since she had no one but Izuku and Hajime, but the latter is more of a friend or a brother, but either way, this world reminded her of her uncle's betrayal. Those 2 months were a nice way to cool down a little bit from everything that we had gone through when conquering the labyrinth. But the sooner we conquer the other labyrinths, the sooner we get to return to home together. Said Izuku firmly. And anywhere you go is my home. Said Yu in a gentle tone. It doesn't matter where Izuku takes her, as long as it's with him, then she could care less about where they're heading. Once we head outside the Oscar labyrinth, we'll be met with very dangerous opponents like those apostles of gods that Oscar mentioned in his diary. It's best if we remain vigilant, but I'm sure we'll do just fine. Said Izuku while Yu hummed in agreement. The group of 3 now stood at the magic circle in the very same room where Oscar's corpse was once laid but now was buried outside. The magic circle in the room was giving a very faint red glow, showing that they were going to be teleported outside. Izuku's adventure outfit consists of a long-sleeved dark-colored dress suit over a dress suit with a tie, and sports dress held by a belt with a star on the center. Lastly, he wears a light-colored coat draped over his shoulders like a cape. Hajime's adventure outfit is similar in design to Izuku, as it consists of a black coat with crimson-colored linings and trimmings, coupled with a gray blazer and a buttoned white shirt underneath it, along with a cravat terminated by a ring tied around his neck. Hajime additionally wears black that have gun holsters attached to them, as well as knee-length black boots. Lastly, Yu's adventure outfit consists of a frilly white dress shirt and a black mini-skirt with frills. She also wears a white coat with a blue lining as well as a short pair of boots and knee-high socks. We're fully prepared. I've learned all I can from monster meat. Said Hajime before he raised his left hand to reveal his prosthetic arm that he had been improving for the past 2 months. We're all geared up too. It took us a whole 2 months. Said Hajime as he clenched his prosthetic arm, showing that his body had already gotten used to the new arm. Prosthetic arms or limbs in general are very dangerous. Izuku knows because he spends years on the internet learning whatever he can. Most people tend to avoid buying prosthetic limbs because they're expensive, ranging from tens of thousands of yen up to 1 million yen. Not only that, prosthetic limbs have a variety of issues that most people tend to overlook, such as sanitary issues due to bacteria, so that could worsen the health of those who wear one, but he doubts that Hajime will face such issues mainly because of the monster meat he ate. If Hajime hadn't eaten the monster meat as he did, then he would have taken a long time to rehabilitate, mainly due to balance issues, skin irritation, and other problems, but his new physiology as a hybrid monster had negated this little problem, so he only needed back massages regularly. It's also good for our mental health. I don't think I would have been able to just jump back to the surface 2 months ago without a little bit of cooldown. Izuku admitted honestly. They've spent a month or more inside the labyrinth just conquering it in order to find the exit. The ancient magic was an unexpected yet a welcome bonus, but if they were to jump back to the surface, he doesn't think he can take such mental pressure. Hajime nodded his head. He had to admit that this little cooldown had helped him focus on creating new weapons to prepare for the outside. Not only that, he was able to take his mind away from what he had experienced down there in the abyss. Not to mention, Izuku's irritating pranks with him being the target had actually helped him mentally, because it helped save his human heart with him and Izuku bantering like good old best friends. If Izuku hadn't done that, he probably would have spent an entire month in the workshop doing nothing but single-mindedly focusing on creating weapons to escape this world, so he was grateful, but he would not admit it out loud. My weapons and powers aren't normal up on the surface? Hajime directed his attention to the former vampire queen, who looked at him a little curiously. The Holy Church and other kingdoms won't be able to keep quiet about him. We'd be fine if it were just them, but we might be targeted by godly beings such as those apostles that Izuku had learned about from Oscar's diary. Said Hajime, reminding you of how dangerous his weapons were. Izuku nodded in agreement. Bringing guns and modern weapons into a world of sword and magic would change everything. It wouldn't be a surprise if the kingdom had called Hajime back in hopes that he would supply the army with those advanced weapons. Those people couldn't be trusted. From the very start, the kingdom had never been honest as to the reason why this human versus demon war had been going on for centuries. It was simply due to religion. The human worshipped Ihit and the demons worshipped Alva. They practically dragged them into a petty war and even used the excuse that they were cornered by the demon race to get them to sympathize with them. If only they knew that they were being used by Ihit as entertainment, but Izuku hardly cares about them to even tell them. From what Izuku had learned up to this point, that the normal soldiers are just disposable fodders, they only know how to wield swords and wield a few basic magic. Their strength lies mostly on numbers and outnumbering the enemy. Summoned heroes like them are special because they're given a combat-type job/vocation, and even those without combat-type jobs are already cheat-level characters such as Izuku who had the job, farmer, that could change and revolutionize the food. If he had to use the hero ranking to rate them, then the normal soldiers would be those nameless heroes that are above the 100th rank. Summon heroes like them can range from top 50, which are the low tier, to top 20 for those who are mid-tier, and then lastly some like Cookie can be top 10. Now those are ranking based on power alone, but since the summoned heroes need to use magic circle or chant for spell, then the pro heroes who don't really require any sort of prep would be able to outsped them and restrain them. The only difference is him, you, and Hajime, who can manipulate mana directly without chanting or even magic circle, which puts them at the level of top 3 pro heroes. Even then, the many hacks he, you, and Hajime possess is enough to allow them to overpower them as well, but that's just speculation. The people at the top 10, more specifically top 5 pro heroes, are so strong that it's hard to evaluate them since they don't exactly need to fight, and even then most villains are third-rate, so they tend to get restrained or blitzed, so Izuku couldn't exactly evaluate their limits. Lastly, there were the ancient magic users. According to the Highlight Kingdom as well as the church, the humans are cornered by the demons for the simple reason that they can control monsters, which changed the tide of the wars. Control monsters. This was definitely the work of an ancient magic, and if he had to guess, it was metamorphosis magic. No wonder the humans in this era were cornered greatly. Oscar's diary was quite vague, so he couldn't exactly evaluate how strong an ancient magic user is, but from what he had managed to connect from what he had read so far was that they should be strong enough to one-shot several All Mights with relative ease. Since each liberator possesses one ancient magic due to them being atavist, and as such couldn't have more than one single ancient magic. He, you, and Hajime, who are on the path to conquer the other labyrinths around the world, should theoretically be as strong as Ihit, maybe even stronger. The reason he thinks that is because according to Oscar's note, those who had an ancient magic were said to be descendant of God and possess a fraction of his power, which led him to assume that Ihit possess all ancient magic. It might just be us against the world on this journey. We may not have enough lives saved up to survive it, said Hajime while Izuku snorted a little at that. Don't worry, Hajime. We won't die that easily as long as we don't get too cocky, said Izuku, which is his honest opinion. Leaving aside his and Yu's immortality and ability to regenerate from things like decapitation, as long as they don't allow the enemy to get the best of them, then they're good. The red glow of the magic circle had increased than before, and then they disappeared from Orcus' lair. The Halia tribe is a tribe of rabbitmen that formerly resided in the Sea of Trees, which was a safe haven for beastmen/demi-human, as it is surrounded by an impenetrable fog that makes it impossible to navigate it unless you're a beastman. The Halia tribe are a docile tribe considered as the weakest of all beastmen, and as of few years ago, they were forced to flee the Sea of Trees for the fact that they harbored a person who has the ability to use mana, which as per the custom makes her cursed, and as such they attempted to execute her. The Halia tribe may be a docile tribe, but they had a sense of unity. It wasn't simply because the person they harbored was the daughter of the head of the Halia tribe, but rather they valued each other, and as such they all willingly left together. As such, the Halia tribe headed to the north, which eventually led to them being discovered by the Holshire Empire's soldiers, who are known for their enslavement of beastmen and discrimination towards them, and were chased all the way to the Risen Gorge. Unfortunately, half of them were captured by the Empire soldiers and definitely transported back to the Empire for them to live a life of being. It was a fate worse than even death itself, but what can they do as the weakest race? Even then, all of them were aware that as the weakest tribe that they would be either killed by one of the monsters that are roaming around or get themselves captured by the Empire soldiers and turned into with no freedom at all, as this was the fate of being in a world where survival of the fittest reigns. Even then, one person among them had refused to yield to such fate. This would be 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐬𝐬, the daughter of the head of the 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐬 tribe and the one who all the misfortune that befell her own tribe was due to her existence. At least this was her honest thoughts. As such, she embarked on a dangerous journey to find her tribe's saviors. 2 months ago, she had managed to learn about her tribe's saviors who were to appear right on the spot where she was running towards. How does she know this? Well, aside from her ability to manipulate mana, she is also an atavist with a unique skill that allows her to view the future more so when her own life is in danger, such as now where she is chased by a monster which is the 𝐒𝐮𝐻𝐻𝐻 that possessed 2 heads. Luckily, she was able to hide somewhere behind the rocks while the mindless monster walked past her, clearly looking for her. 𝐒𝐮 knew she wasn't going to be able to hide forever, and as such she was a little bit impatient for those 3 to appear and save her and her tribe. 𝐒𝐮 is a very attractive and appealing rabbitman with blue eyes and light blue hair along with the rabbit ears atop her head, which is unique for her race and clan. She takes pride in her large chest and her gallant figure, which makes her come out as self-centered. She had decided to use any means to convince her saviors to help her, even if it meant using her natural good looks and her exceptionally gifted large chest to suck them into helping her tribe, since she had managed to identify that among the group was 2 guys. She was aware of how those Empire soldiers had looked at her when she encountered them once. She knew that she was a beauty and she was going to use it to her own advantage. 𝐒𝐮 was willing to make the sacrifice for her own tribe. "I'm so tired of waiting. When are they going to appear?" wondered 𝐒𝐮 in an impatient voice filled with desperation as well. The tension was quite high for her as she kept peeking every time towards the location she had foreseen in her vision. Her excessive movement along with her rabbit ears that were sticking out was not helping her, especially at the end when she recklessly stuck her head as well as her entire torso to stare, which proved to be a fatal mistake. Thump! Such an ominous sound was heard by 𝐒𝐮's sensitive ear as she turned her head robotically to see the 𝐒𝐻𝐻𝐻 who was chasing her as of earlier now staring at her with a drool leaking from his mouth, showing that it was hungry for a rabbitman flesh. 𝐒𝐮 squealed loudly, and another chase had happened with the 𝐒𝐻𝐻𝐻 with 2 heads chased after her once more. The group of 3 had been successfully transported outside the labyrinth as their view was filled by the crimson light from the magic circle. The air definitely felt different even though nothing could be seen. It's clearly different compared to the air from the depth of the hell. Sensing the fresh air from somewhere, Hajime's cheeks are loosened and Izuku breathed in the fresh air, filling his lungs completely, and had a satisfied look as they are now back at the surface. Yu was filled with various emotions, albeit it couldn't be seen on her face, but Izuku could see the twitching of her eyes to even the movement of her fingers, even as she unconsciously held onto his hand, showing that she was deeply moved. As their sight adjusted to their surroundings after the red light from the magic circle had died down, they were met with a cave. Hajime looked shocked as opposed to Izuku and Yu. "Say what?" Hajime spoke without any further thought. Disappointment could be seen clearly on his expression as he looked at the ring and felt that he may have done something wrong. "A secret passage," spoke Yu as she held onto Izuku's hands. Her own expression didn't show much surprise over the situation since this was really expected. "To be hidden is usual," spoke Yu once more as if she was stating a fact that should be considered somewhat of a common sense. Hajime's face had turned red from embarrassment, especially when he saw Izuku blank stare at him. "You should know this already. How can you call yourself an otaku?" Izuku's eyes said everything as Hajime averted his eyes away, feeling pain from not knowing something so basic. "Ah, is that so? It certainly is. There is no way that the direct way to Den of the Rebels wouldn't be hidden, right?" said Hajime quickly to hide his shame at not realizing something so simple as he unconsciously scratched his head. It was already a known fact that the Liberators were rebels. A possible secret entrance right at their backyards is not something they would simply ignore. It was a fatal mistake, and those liberators aren't the type who would make such an obvious mistake, especially when they have the entire world on there nonetheless. Hajime's expression hardened, and without aid from the green light stone, Hajime, Izuku and you advanced through the pitch-black cave without any problems. On the way, though there were many doors with seals and traps, the Orcus ring would react, canceling the activation altogether. The three of them were cautious at first, but soon lost interest as nothing had happened so far and continued to advance, till they finally found light. It's the light from the surface. The light which Hajime and Izuku for the past few months, and you for the past 300 years sought for, and now they were seeing the light of freedom. Hajime, Izuku and you came to a stop when they saw it, looking at each other, exchanging glances, the three of them grinning, and simultaneously started to run toward the light that they yearned for. As they approached the light, which was gradually getting bigger, they could feel and breathe the air from the surface. It was different from the stagnant air from hell. The air was cool and fresh. Hajime had never felt as much as now how delicious the air was. Thus, Hajime, Izuku and you jumped into the light and reached the long-awaited surface. To the humans who live above ground, this place was a hell, an execution ground. Below the cliff, magic could hardly be used. Even so, a lot of powerful and brutal monsters live there. Hajime, Izuku and you were currently outside of the cave at the bottom of the 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐸𝐵 Grand Canyon. Although they were at the bottom of the earth, the sun from above poured down bright and warm light. The fragrance of the surface mixed with the wind was tickling their nose. Compared to any kind of place it could have been, this place was surely the surface. In a daze while looking at the sun above their head, Hajime, Izuku and Yu's facial expressions gradually turned into smiles. Even Yu, who was expressionless by default, could be seen smiling broadly by anyone who had looked at her. "Ah yeah. We made it back," shouted Hajime with both arms raised up in the air for a loud cheer that every monster down there had heard, but he didn't care. "Hell yang," shouted Izuku as well in a cheer. He was moved by such a sight. He didn't care if he attracted attention down there, this was enough to celebrate. "Yeah." Yu also shouted with a smile on her face. Yu, who was known to have an expressionless face and emotionless voice at times, had shown too much emotion on her face as she was now back at the surface after 300 years of solitude. Yu giggled as she rushed towards Izuku with her arm open for a hug, while Izuku grinned as well, letting out a small chuckle before the two hugged each other and fell to the ground without any care whatsoever. Their lips met as they made out without any care in the world. The air started to turn pink as if the two had isolated themselves in a separate dimension, as if they were in a world of their own. Tisk, Hame turned his face away from this mushy stuff. He would not admit that he was a little jealous. He too would want a girl he could do this with, but maybe later. Several ugly-looking monsters surrounded the group of three. Izuku and Yu laid on their respective backs, looking very annoyed by how those groups of monsters had rudely interrupted them. "Sheesh, how rude can you get?" Izuku asked, expressing his annoyance at those monsters that surrounded them, while Yu felt the same. "You should have let us enjoy ourselves a little bit longer," said Yu, her voice emotionless, but yet one can tell that she was rightfully angry since they interrupted such a heartfelt moment. "Fine by me though. You'll make good target practice for my new gear," said Hajime with a grin, clearly unfazed as he summoned both the reborn Donner and 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐸𝐵 from the treasure trove. Using pursuit skill, Hajime fired 2 bullets which he controlled, and it started to pierce the heads of the monsters at a blinding speed, which resulted in the monsters being killed before they could make sense of what happened. Hajime didn't need to waste as much bullets, nor did he need to reload his revolvers, which made him grin. He no longer regrets following Izuku's training regiment since it yielded results. After all, Izuku has always been about being efficient than being wasteful, and instead of wasting all 12 bullets, he instead only used up to 2 bullets that had done its intended job. "Hajime, what's wrong?" asked Yu curiously as she looked at Hajime, who looked at the 2 revolvers with a frown. Izuku understood what was going on because he too felt it. "We're in the 𝐒𝐮𝐸𝐸𝐵 Gorge. According to the history books, it used to be an execution ground due to magic being weakened down there, and from Oscar Diary, the Great 𝐒𝐮𝐸𝐸𝐵 Labyrinth should be located somewhere here," said Izuku, clearly remembering the books he read. The kingdom didn't have much information, or rather it was probably classified or covered up since the events were more than thousands years ago. It was from Oscar's diary that Izuku had learned that the Rizin Gorge belonged to a powerful family of magic users called the Rizin. Those people were believers of 𝐒𝐮, and as such they executed heretics that the church had ordered to be disposed of for their crimes. The Great Rizin Labyrinth belonged to the leaders of the Liberators, which is ironic considering that the princess of the Rizin had rebelled. "The spell is being dispersed," said Yu in a little surprise as she raised a finger and ignited a small fire spell, but it soon dispersed, which proved Izuku to be correct. "Yeah, the same thing happened with my lighting field," said Hajime as he had noticed that his bullets were a little bit slower. That was due to the lighting field being weakened. "Me and Izuku can take care of any monsters that come our way, so let's go look." "Whoa." Hajime, who looked back at Yu, gasped in shock when the fire spell ignited on her finger burst out, and this time it wasn't dispersing. Hajime had imagined that given that Yu was a magic user, that this place would be a total nightmare for her. So he told her to leave everything to him and Izuku, who are physically strong enough to rip a monster in half even without the use of magic. His way of thinking is logical and filled with common sense. At least that would be the case if it was some run-in-the-mill magician who needed to use chance and magic circles. Yu, on the other hand, was the best magic user to the point of being called a genius ever since she was only 10 years old. "Fixed it. You just have to use so much mana that it can't get dispersed," said Yu in a calm voice as if she was dealing with some minor nuisance while Hanmei was baffled. "In such a situation where magic is being dispersed down here, the solution that you came up with is to use too much mana that it can't be dispersed." It was common sense. It's like dealing with a large fire that is burning an entire house. Using a bucket of water won't put out the fire. Instead, it will probably be boiled by the immense heat of the flames, so to deal with it, you would need an even larger amount of water to overpower it. "I can see why they call you one of the strongest beings in the world," said Hajime with an exasperated look, but then smiled nonetheless. "As expected of our genius magician." Izuku praised her as well as he patted her head, making her close her eyes and smile while purring like a cat or like a kid who was being praised by their own family. The idea itself sounds easy, but you'd need to have an immense mana pool and good control over it to be able to use it. Many magicians would require a lot of time in order to adjust their magic power, but you did it instantly, showing her immense talent in magic. "Now then, let's get moving, shall we?" said Hajime as he raised his hand, showing the ring called Treasure Trove, which is an artifact that allows for almost anything to be stored within the gem as its center. Both Izuku and Yu had received one as well. As Izuku had been interested in the Treasure Trove in order to store Yamato away, and also gave one to Yu, who was pleased to receive another ring from Izuku. Izuku also raised his little finger, showing his own treasure trove. There was also another ring, but this one he received from Yu herself, which he placed in his ring finger, but this one had no special ability, as this was just a ring similar to the one he gave her when he proposed to her. Izuku summoned his own motorcycle, which he named as Cavalier. It was a black motorcycle created from a fusion of a normal motorcycle and sections of demonic metal armor that he created using his power. The front resembles a helmet, batwing-like decorative extensions to the side fairing, and double-sided serrated blades extending from the point where the front fork meets the wheel. Izuku had created the motorcycle based on another vision he had when he was thinking of creating a vehicle upon seeing what Hajime was creating, and that came into his mind, and as such, with the help of Yu, he had created it. Hajime, on the other hand, brought an American chopper-style motorcycle with a black frame made of Azantium. As it runs on mana, it's quieter than even an electric car. Speed is also adjusted based on the amount of mana supplied to the engine, so it's even much easier to learn and handle than conventional motorcycles that require shifting gears. "I didn't know you created a motorcycle," said Hajime in surprise as he looked at the vehicle with appraising eyes, and was impressed since he knew this was a high-tier one. "I saw you creating Steve and Breeze, so I decided to at least have some form of transportation, but it was still annoying to create it," said Izuku. Admittedly, he had difficulty since he wasn't suited for creation magic. So throughout the 2 months inside the lair, he had created this motorcycle. Hajime, on the other hand, was on a creation spree. Aside from the vehicle that he had created, he also created his prosthetic arm, his weapons, and other things. "I've used my demonic power to empower it, so you can say it's somewhat sentient," said Izuku, It was basically like an automated motorcycle that does what he orders but it can't think for itself. Also during the 2 months, Izuku had told Hajime about what he learned from you in regards to Sparta. It surprised him, but at the end Hajime didn't much care, albeit Hajime would often give him the look that says, "You cheat level BSTRD." Or, "You were already broken from the start? Who's the cheat level BSTRD now? We're gonna keep heading east while searching for the labyrinth here. I gotta think there's more towns to be found in the forests to the east rather than that big desert out west." Spoke Hajime using telepathy. "Now that I think about it, there should be a labyrinth in the forest too," said Izuku using telepathy, as well as he remembered the notes of Oscar, although not much was said. Oscar notes only mentioned the location of the labyrinth and also stated what ancient magic could be received from conquering them. It didn't surprise him that much when Oscar didn't mention anything about what the trial is about or the requirements to enter it. The whole point of the 7 labyrinths is to test the challengers like them, so giving them information would be really counterproductive, as those labyrinths are supposed to prepare them, or rather prepare those who have the ambition to kill a hit and his inner circle. Izuku and Hajime care less about this world inhabitant, and by extension you could care less since she had no one else other than Izuku and Hajime. Their goal is to return home safely. What happens to the people of this world is of no concern to them. It was selfish of them, considering that there are good people who really did nothing wrong to them, but they were only 16-year-old teenagers. They had family waiting for them back in their own world. It would be one thing if they were given a choice to decide whether they want to fight or not, but technically speaking, they were practically dragged to this world unwillingly and told to fight. The eyes of the Pope that day spoke everything that needed to be said. You have no choice. It's in your best interest to cooperate. You have nowhere to go. If they refused to fight, they'd probably be slapped with an "you're a heretic," and live a life being chased and shunned away simply because they refused to fight in a way not their own. Seeing how the liberator's life had ended, it would be a death sentence if you're seen as a heretic. "That's a monster's roar," you spoke quietly as she looked back, trying to find where the monster roar came from, but it was ahead of them, and she seemed to realize it as she adjusted her sight ahead of her. Currently you was sitting in front of Izuku merely because he wanted to hug her from behind or kiss the nape of her neck while riding the motorcycle while she rubbed her butt against him. "Sounds like it could put up more of a fight than those weaklings from before," said Hajime telepathically as he looked before him, seeing the large monster that was chasing someone. "A rabbit?" Izuku quizzically asked, as given his heightened senses, he was able to clearly see the person being chased by the monster as compared to Hajime and you who didn't see it. The appearance of Shay became apparent while Hajime frowned at seeing the rabbitman that was dressed in such a lewd outfit that only consists of a sleeveless bikini that looks like a swimsuit, which leaves her stomach, midriff as well the upper portion of her melons exposed. She also wore a mini skirt that is definitely exposing more than it should. "I finally found you. Please Shay be me," shouted the tearful Shay as she rushed towards their direction without stopping while still being chased. "Sheech finally found us. Kind of a strange thing to say," said you, clearly confused by this odd behavior. She found it weird how the rabbitmen acted like she knew them. "This is odd, for some reason I sense mana from her," said Izuku using telepathy to convey what he was sensing, which made Hajime frown and shook his own head in denial. "Beastmen don't have mana. Seems like getting involved with her would be a pain," said Hajime telepathically as well, but you also sensed that something was odd as well. "What?" shouted Shay upon seeing the 2 motorcycles swerving around and heading in the opposite direction of her, which made her panic and begged once more. "Please don't abandon me. I'm begging you," shouted Shay once more while Hajime looked back at the rabbitmen and clicked his own tongue in annoyance. Due to his own interest in female rabbitmen due to their fluffy ears, and surely not because of their scantily dressed clothing that really left nothing for their imagination, made him abruptly stop with the tires screeching on the ground. Bang! A bullet is all it took for Hajime to activate his skill, Pursuit, and the 2 heads were pierced, surprising Shay, who let out a loud squeak before falling on both her knees with both hands on the ground supporting her. "It's really dead. You killed that Dihedor with a single shot?" Shay said with clear awe in her voice as she saw the 2 heads of the Dihedor that was just spurting BLD everywhere. "Oh, thank you so much for saving me. Now please, listen to my Shay, who looked like a maiden that had just gotten saved by her knight in shining armor, or rather saved by the demon himself, was trying to launch herself in his arm. Unfortunately for her, she was met ruthlessly with a metallic prosthetic arm of Hajime that grabbed her face and started to squeeze her face, making her let out yelps of pain. "Who saved who, exactly?" asked Hajime menacingly, looking even more like a demon than a prince. Tsundere Hajime would never admit out loud that he had just saved her out of the kindness of his heart, especially considering the reason he had saved her was due to his FTSH for female rabbitmen. He'd be breaking his own character. "There was an enemy in front of me, so I beat it down. That's all. Don't get the wrong idea," said Hajime like a typical Tsundere character mixed with an edgelord character. As he let his grip loosened, Shay fell on her back and started rolling left and right while holding her face from the pain of having her face being squeezed this tightly by the prosthetic arm that threatened to crush her skull. Izuku and Yu looked at each other in amusement. The two knew full well that Hajime had a FTSH for female rabbitmen. It was pretty obvious from the way he acted, like he didn't care when he actually did care. "I don't have time to waste on some rabbit I don't even know. Time to hurry up and get out of here," said Hajime loud enough for Shay to hear as he turned away from her. "Sorry about that, you two. Let myself get caught with this weirdo," Hajime said as he looked at the two who were giving him an amusing look which made him shiver as he realized that they could read him too well. "I am not letting you get away if you leave now. The future is going to change," said Shay through the tears and some snot that was going down her nose. "Future is going to change," thought Izuku, and glanced at Yu, who seemed to have had the same thought as she too had caught onto what Shay had said earlier. Hajime turned towards her, but his eyes fell directly on her rabbit ears that were moving in a hypnotic way that attracted him, but he can't just openly play with her ears without giving himself away. He placed his hand on her head, which made Shay smile, thinking that he had a change of heart, only for him to grab both her ears and use his lighting field, electrocuting her, which made her go ababababa. If Hajime's otaku parents were there, he could already imagine them tearfully kicking Hajime in the gut for doing something like that to a cute fantasy rabbit wearing such a scanty dress. "Ahoy really does work if you put about 10 times as much power into it," said Hajime, not admitting that he wanted to feel her rabbit ears before he let her go. "Well, you never know. If you try and live every day like you'll die tomorrow, I'm sure things you'll work out. Good luck and all that," said Hajime nonchalantly as he turned his back once more on her with his mechanical prosthetic arm raised in the air. "Oh, I didn't see anything like this happening in my predictions," said Shay as she nursed her head that just got brutally electrocuted. The fact that she was still standing shows how impressive she is. "Prediction. Future prediction or sight," muttered Izuku, just enough for Yu, who was standing next to him, to hear and looked a little bit surprised, but she also came to the same conclusion. "An atavist," spoke Yu quietly as the two looked at each other, seeing that they were of the same thought, and smiled at each other, almost bringing the pink world once more. "What is your problem? How could you do all that to a drop-dead appealing girl like me?" Shay screamed out loud at Hajime, who just sweat-dropped. "So she's self-centered?" thought Izuku amusingly. "You'd have to be self-centered to just call yourself a drop-dead appealing girl, especially when in the presence of someone like you. Let's hear a bit of what she has to say," said Yu, being curious and wanting to confirm if the rabbitman before them is actually an atavist, while Izuku supported her. "I'm also curious to hear what she has to say," said Izuku as well. He too wanted to confirm his own suspicion in regards to why he was sensing mana from her when demi-humans are not supposed to possess mana. Hajime looked at the two with a disbelieving look but relented. "Izuku and you didn't do this out of the kindness of their hearts. They were simply curious, but if she proved to be a waste of time, then they would leave her to her fate. They were already being generous in giving her a moment of their time. This is as far as their kindness will go." With that said, Shay resolved herself to explain the situation. This was a moment that will change the course of her tribe's history. "Garg." Hayama coughed BLD as his back touched the tree bark. He looked up at the perpetrator with fear in his eyes, as he looked like a cornered animal, but compared to the one before him, he was an insect that had no hope of ever defying him. His sword was shattered to pieces and scattered all over the ground. He was far away from the castle, so nobody could save him, having been dragged here by his assailant. An unexpected person that nobody would ever think would do something like this, but 4 people know his nature. Daisuke Hayama was a rotten person to the core. He was a bully who had harassed Hajime and Izuku throughout middle school, albeit Hajime was his main target of bullying due to his subject of interest, Kaori Shirasaki, showing more interest in the good-for-nothing otaku. At the start he, like all others, was content to admire her from afar when she used to hang around Cookie. He was a coward and, as expected of a bully, he could never do anything to someone like Cookie, who can just beat him up if the situation needed. Even then, Cookie didn't need to physically beat him to put him in his place. If he dared to do anything to Cookie, he was finished. His own social life would be dragged down to the mud and he'd be an outcast for the rest of his life, which is something he feared above all else, so as someone who knew his place, he just watched from a distance. When Kaori started to get close to Hajime, Hayama decided to make a bid to make her his woman. Since Hajime was a quirkless nobody, Hayama doubted anybody would do anything against him aside from a very select few such as the staff, Shizuku Yagashi and Kaori Shirasaki, among other people. Unfortunately, given their middle school's strict policy over quirk usage and physical bullying, it was obvious that Hayama can do nothing but hurl insults and demean the two on a daily basis, but while Hajime would give him that awkward look while trying to de-escalate the situation, Izuku was different. Hayama was intimidated by Izuku, especially when he looked at him with cold eyes as if to tell him, "Is that all you can do?" Hayama could never intimidate Izuku, but that was due to the difference between him and Katsuki Bakugo. Izuku had seen everything with Bakugo that what he did was considered to be cute. Nonetheless, when they got summoned to this world and were told that they get to be gifted with supernatural power adding onto their quirks, Hayama was excited, but for a different reason that is far more sinister and evil. Like he had hoped, Hajime had the synergist vocation with average stats and only 2 skills. He was a loser and that made Hayama pleased, but when he turned to Izuku, he was surprised and intimidated when he saw the stats that rivaled their class hero. When Izuku had retaliated and put him and his 2 goons in their place, he had backed away. After all, at the end of the day he was nothing more than a coward. He would not bully someone who has no problem beating him black and blue. He had shifted his attention to Hajime and tried to bully him despite having received a warning earlier from Izuku, who made it clear that he would also retaliate if Hajime were to ever be harmed. The result was several broken bones that it took several days for him to heal properly. After Izuku and Hajime were removed from the picture during the expedition in the Orcus Labyrinth, he was happy, but it didn't take long for Kaori to give him the cold shoulder and he then started to panic. What if she knew what he did? Or maybe she is just grieving and needs time. Those were the thoughts that ran into his own mind, especially when he had noticed that she was also giving Cookie the cold shoulder, so he assumed that it was just the latter. Even though he thought he could get away with what he did, someone else caught onto what he did, and that would be Eri Nakamura, who proceeded to blackmail him into working for her, which he didn't mind as long as he got to have Kaori for himself. He was not a loyal person. He'd betray everyone including his classmates if it meant that he could benefit from it. He would join even the demon side if they can fulfill his goals, and he joined Eri because she would help him have Kaori as long as he does whatever she commands him to do. Hayama didn't like it, but Eri was far stronger than him since she had those puppets that she had reanimated. Nonetheless, he had respected her for her devious nature but despised having to be subservient for her, but swallowed his pride and discomfort. "Why are you doing this, Amanagawa-san?" asked Hayama as he looked with terror. His body was trembling at the mere sight of the hero who could easily crush him on the sole of his shoes. Cookie stood unfazed, his blue eyes looking down on him coldly as if seeing an insect that was not worth his attention, but nonetheless an insect that had just bit more than it should have. Cookie held a regular sword and wore bedroom clothes which consisted of a white shirt and black. It was obvious that it was high-quality clothes, unlike what was actually given to the rest of the class, but he was the hero, so he was given the best of what the kingdom has to offer. "You're getting too comfortable thinking that you can approach Kaori so casually like this?" Cookie spoke coldly, which had quickly sent shivers down Hayama's spine as he realized that Cookie was annoyed with him. I don't know what your tal?" Hayama's attempted to lie through his teeth to be spared from Cookie's displeasure, but his attempt was not appreciated as a foot slammed on his right shoulder casually. Crack. The ominous and terrifying sound of a shoulder being broken could be heard echoing throughout the forest as his arm fell to his side limply. Before Hayama could scream once more and possibly alert others, the sword that is currently in Cookie's hand had quickly pointed at Hayama's throat. The threat was so clear, "You scream, I will slit your throat." Hayama tearfully could only nod his head in terror as he bit his own tongue, causing blood to seep from his mouth as he tried to suppress his shout of pain as Cookie lifted his sword and looked at him with a bored expression. "Killing you here and now would bring too much suspicion on me, even though it's doubtful that this kingdom would ever do anything to me since I'm the hero and they need me while you're a nobody," said Cookie, reminding Hayama of the difference in level they're playing at. "But make no mistake. If I want you dead, then I will kill you here and make sure that nobody will find your remains since I'd have burned you to ashes by now," threatened Cookie while Hayama gulped down his saliva and nodded in fear. "So what do you want me to do?" asked Hayama, stuttering in fear. He was already thinking of selling Eri out to Cookie if it meant that he could be in his good graces. Unfortunately, Eri had used her quirk on him to make sure he would not run his mouth to someone else. It seems that Eri knew of his disloyal nature far too well, and she decided to take precautionary measures to ensure that her pet would not do something unnecessary. "Stay out of Kaori and Shizuku's way. They're my childhood friends, and so it's only natural they'd be at my side." Cookie emphasized on the word "my" to the insolent insect before him. His control freak nature was seeping from him, and Hayama could clearly see it. "Okay," shouted Hayama, but the sword was pointed once more at his neck. The sharp tip of the metal sword poked his neck, causing blood to leak out as it made Hayama squeak and use his only arm to cover his mouth. Cookie didn't care much when seeing the blood leaking from Hayama's throat as he continued to talk, or rather monologue, about his ambition to Hayama. He was not threatened by Hayama to hide anything, or rather he was way too stupid to know such a concept. "We're going to save this world and become heroes of this world. You and the rest are nothing more than just pawns, or supporting characters that make me look good. Don't do anything unnecessary," said Cookie while Hayama nodded fearfully as Cookie pulled the sword away. "Every great hero out there has to have his own heroine by his own side, and as they are my childhood friends, it's only natural that they would become the heroine of my story," said Cookie as if he was speaking a fact while Hayama nodded his head. "I understand," squeaked Hayama as he nodded his own head a little bit too much, but Cookie had paid him no mind as he looked at the moon that is beautifully set in the sky. "Every great hero in every story grows through a development phase, such as losing a comrade along the way, but all of this is just a setup for the hero to reach new heights," said Cookie in a very passionate voice while Hayama's face grew even more in fear. "That means that you and the others are there to make me look good, to help advance the plot of my own story. I will become a great hero even more than my own grandfather," said Cookie, revealing his ambition as he looked at him darkly. "He's nuts," thought Hayama in clear terror. Cookie was way off the mark. He had just twisted everything that a hero is supposed to embody. What terrified Hayama the most is the level of delusion that is being spouted out of Cookie's mouth. Cookie was treating this as a fantasy world where everything bends down to his every whim, since he was naturally the hero of this world. To Cookie, sacrificing others was not really wrong since he is the hero, so they're obligated to do so to advance the plot of his story and make him gain more power and grow. To Cookie, only a villain would go after the hero's women. In that case, Cookie had labeled Hayama as a villain who is trying to make a grab at one of the heroines of his story, and as such he is putting him in his place. To Cookie, his classmates should be happy that they're just another stepping stone to him. After all, in all the story, whenever a comrade sacrifices their life for the hero to advance, they're all smiling while saying something cliched like, "Defeat the demon king for me, Hiro-sama." This is how it should go, but people like Izuku, Hajime, Hayama, including a few others, are ruining his perfect image of how his story should go. His mood was bad considering that as of recently, both Kaori as well as Shizuku are rebelling against him, but patience is bitter, but its fruit is sweet. "So let's stick to our roles, Hayama-kun," said Cookie with a cheerful smile, but after seeing the other side of Cookie, the cheerful smile looked far more sinister than anything else. Pulling him up, Cookie placed Hayama's arm over his shoulder and started talking normally as if they were good friends who had a good spar. Hayama was even more terrified as he chuckled nervously to not get killed. "What did I just see? I'm so dead," thought a person with a very thin shadow and lack of presence who peeked from the tree with terror. This was Kosuke Indu, who had just come here to relax his nerves but ended up stumbling into something he shouldn't have seen. For once, he was glad to have a thin shadow as he contemplated what to do. Now then allow me to tell you my story, spoke Shay, who was still in the ground but was looking at the group of 3 individuals who were going to save her tribe. My tribe, the 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐸𝐴 tribe, had lived deep inside the beastmen country of Verbergen, within the Sea of Trees. But because of me, my tribe is constantly being pursued, spoke Shay as she recounted her story. Usually, beastmen possess no kind of mana whatsoever. I was an exception, however, and can even manipulate that mana directly. On top of that, I have the specialized magic, Future Sight. It's an ability that allows me to see the potential outcomes from making certain choices. Shay revealed, much to Hajime's surprise. Izuku and you weren't as surprised as Hajime as they looked at each other, realizing that they were right on the money. The female rabbitman not only can manipulate mana like a monster, but she is also an atavist, something that is unheard of. Unfortunately, this means I have a power normally held only by monsters. If I were captured, there's no doubt I would be executed. My tribe left the forest behind, on an exodus to the mountains in the north, said Shay with a serious look, recounting the events. Can't blame them, thought Izuku to himself. He didn't blame the beastmen in the forest for trying to execute Shay as they did, and especially how they reacted to the weakest tribe defying them. Even if you were to ignore the fact that a beastman happens to possess mana and can also manipulate it like the monsters and is also an atavist. If both the church and the demon heard about this, they'd have both sides knocking on their doorsteps. The church would either try to turn Shay into their own side for the war, or the demons will try to do it. There is also the likely chance that both sides might feel threatened that the beastmen might end up starting to develop mana and would join the war, causing a 3-way war. Besides, a beastman possibly developing mana goes against the doctrine of the church and for the demons. After all, if there is anything that both humans and demons share in common, is their beliefs that the beastmen are a lower race who were forsaken by the gods. In that regard, having both the humans and demons knocking on their own forest doorstep was dangerous. Not even the fog will keep them safe, since there is a likely chance that the humans and the demons can nullify the fog, and as such they'd be slaughtered by both sides. We were discovered by Imperial soldiers. The people of the 𝐒𝐮𝐸𝐴 tribe are not suited for fighting. Before we realized it, more than half of us had been captured, said Shay as she painfully recounted the Imperial soldiers' faces as they captured more than half of them. Pathetic, thought Izuku to himself. He had read about the other races and tribes in this world, including from Oscar Journal, so he found her and her tribe to be pitiful and pathetic. Shay was just justifying why more than half of her brethren were captured and enslaved against their own will as them simply being unsuited for fighting, which he honestly found to be pathetic. It was just a plain old excuse to justify one's weakness and inability to do what they could do if they had at least put some effort. I can't do this because of that, the enemy is strong so I can't do it, it can't be helped, etc. To Izuku, the rabbitmen have a talent in presence manipulation. If they had used this to their own advantage, they could have easily escaped the clutches of the Imperial soldiers back then. If they decided to fight back, they could be a tribe of assassins or shinobi. So much wasted potential, thought Izuku. The 𝐒𝐿𝐴 tribe could be the most dangerous tribe, especially when they're in their own territory, given that only beastmen can navigate the fog. To avoid complete annihilation, we fled to this gorge, where magic couldn't be used. But that's when we were attacked by monsters, said Shay before she placed a hand on her chest and pleaded. Please, you have to help. Save us. Please, help save my tribe, begged Shay in a pleading voice that would make anyone sympathize with her and agree to help, especially when it's an appealing woman such as herself who is making such a request. Hell no. Hajime shouted with no hesitation whatsoever as he sneered at Shay, who looked shocked, having not expected such an immediate answer. She had expected him to agree or at the very least hesitate. And now wait just a minute. No matter how you look at it, this is where you go, don't sweat it. Just leave it to me, shouted Shay as she made a cool pose with her hand as if trying to imitate what she expected his answer to be. Right? That's totally how this is supposed to go. I saw you three protect us with my future sight," shouted 𝐒𝐮 as she directed her look the most at Izuku and 𝐒𝐮𝐸𝐵. "Simmer down. That's enough of your fooling around. What do we get out of saving your family anyways?" asked 𝐒𝐮𝐸 in a clearly annoyed tone while 𝐒𝐮 hesitated. "You're being pursued by the Empire and your old kingdom. How'd things even end up like this if you've got the future sight, or whatever?" asked 𝐒𝐮𝐸 while 𝐒𝐮 couldn't answer him. Izuku spoke for the first time, who was mostly content to watch the event from afar and determine when to interject in the conversation. 𝐒𝐮 had turned to look at him. "A sob story like this may move the heart of someone else, but there is nothing to gain from this. If anything, it'd be troublesome if we got involved," said Izuku while 𝐒𝐮 looked down. "Our group has goals and we can't just attract attention to us from the Empire and from those other beastmen in the Sea of Trees this early on. This will also naturally cause rumors to go around which would attract the attention of other kingdoms like the 𝐒𝐮𝐸𝐵," said Izuku. His words were logical. "In order to help your tribe, there should be a suitable compensation for the trouble we're going to be involved in. You can't just run towards us and throw yourself at us while begging us to save your tribe." Izuku admonished her even further. "The world doesn't work like that. Where me and 𝐒𝐮𝐸𝐵 come from, there is this quote of time is more valuable than money. Our time is valuable, so what do you plan to offer for our time?" asked Izuku while 𝐒𝐮 went quiet. "It's just like you said. As long as we try hard enough, the future is something we have the power to change. I believe that much at the very least," said 𝐒𝐮 as she clenched her fist, remembering bitter memories. "But there was a future I wasn't able to change, because I didn't try hard enough. But this time, I don't want to give up on the future where you three are with me," said 𝐒𝐮 with resolve in her eyes to fight for the ideal future. "I respect her resolve, but did she ignore what I said earlier?" thought Izuku in his head. What he was doing was cruel and selfish because he was refusing to help someone in need of help. He was sure his old heroic side would have admonished himself harshly. Still, when he was a quirkless nobody and bullied on a daily basis by his former childhood friend turned bully, nobody stepped up and tried to put a stop to this behavior. Instead, people watched as he was just humiliated and harassed on a daily basis. When the teacher exposed him in front of the class to humiliate him, nobody talked about how unprofessional the teacher was that day. When his grades were sabotaged, nobody talked about how unfair it was for him who had just worked hard to get a good grade. When people looked down on him because he was just quirkless, nobody did anything. Society still remained the same, treating him and the others like him as trash, and it was unfair. Life is hard. Life is not fair. The world has always been about survival of the fittest, even back in Japan. You show weakness, you'd be swallowed whole by others who could care less about your feelings or even your circumstances. He trained hard, he studied hard, he rebelled against the corrupt system of the government. He was strong and not weak enough to fall under the pressure of other people. Why couldn't the 𝐒𝐮𝐸𝐵 tribe do the same? Even someone with a disability can do things that even someone without a disability can't do. As long as you're willing to use the available tools before you to grow, then everything should be possible. Izuku used every opportunity and every tool before him to grow strong, such as training regularly every day, taking Shizuku offer and joining the Yagashi dojo, etc. "Izuku, let's take her with us," said Yu loud enough for the two to hear her as Izuku looked at her curiously while 𝐒𝐮𝐸𝐵 raised an eyebrow. "What? Do you really mean it?" "Thank you so much." 𝐒𝐮, who tried to hug Yu by jumping at her with open arms, was met with a fire spell at point blank to her face, which made 𝐒𝐮 roll on the ground. "And why are we letting her tag along, exactly?" asked 𝐒𝐮𝐸𝐵 with both his arms crossed to his chest as he looked at Yu with a serious look. "We'll need a guide to get us through the Sea of Trees. She's lived there before, so she's perfect," said Yu, intending to use 𝐒𝐮 to head to the labyrinth in the Sea of Trees. "You've got a point there," said 𝐒𝐮𝐸𝐵 with a small sigh as he realized that Yu's words were true as he looked at 𝐒𝐮 while Izuku let out a tired sigh. "I guess having a guide would be better. Having her tribe indebted to us would do us good, even if they are good for nothing 𝐒𝐮𝐸𝐵 who are more trouble than they are worth," said Izuku as he rubbed the back of his head. Yu smiled. She knew he only agreed with her because he respected her own opinion as she held his hand and smiled at him and at 𝐒𝐮𝐸𝐵 as well as she conveyed the next words. "And it's all right. We're the strongest there is, said Yu with a thumbs up, with her being the strongest magician out there, Izuku being a descendant of Sparta and Hajime being a hybrid monster. Well, if you say so, then, said Hajime as he looked away with a sigh, but he was convinced by her words and agreed to concede and help the Halia tribe, but in exchange that they'd be their guide. Rejoice, Rabbit. We're going to hire you to be our guide through the forest, said Hajime as he walked towards his motorcycle and turned to look at Shay, whose face and hair were burned, as he extended a hand to her. Your payment is us having saved your life. No complaints about that, I assume? Asked Hajime as he got on the motorcycle and looked at her. Of course not, shouted Shay as she stood up with tears at the corner of her eyes from having her pretty face and hair burned by this evil blonde woman that was you. Good naban, said Hajime as he got the motorcycle working and his prosthetic arms still extended towards Shay, offering her to get behind him as it was the only available seat. I'm Nagumo Hajime. Hajime was quick to introduce himself to Shay as he looked ahead of him with a smirk. It's you, said Yu, who was sitting in front of Izuku, secretly rubbing herself against Izuku, who grinned at her and kissed the nape of her neck, which she enjoyed. I'm Midoriya Izuku, remember that, bunny girl? Said Izuku with a smirk as he too got the motorcycle, Cavalier, working for him, as they all looked at Shay waiting for her response. Pleased to meet you. I'm Shay Halia. Shay introduced herself with a lot of enthusiasm, with tears at the corner of her eyes and a smile on her face from clear happiness. A few months had passed since Hajime and Izuku fell in the deepest pits of the abyss after a somewhat unexpected betrayal from the group hero, but then again those who knew Cookie well enough had realized that it was intentional from the hero part, who despised the two. One person had accidentally learned about the class hero's true nature after he tried to take a stroll at night to clear his mind from all the stress that he had gone through from Hajime and Izuku being dead. He was confused and lost, not knowing what to do. Should he tell someone about what he saw? Or should he stay quiet? Those thoughts ran in his head, but then who would believe him? It's hard to believe that Cookie was this type of person. It also made Kosuke think that the death of Izuku and Hajime was not a mere accident. Like every student, Indu had a favorable opinion of Cookie in the past. The guy was everything he had wanted to be, at least that's what he wanted at the start when he first saw Cookie. Cookie was academically smart, being at the top of the class. He also took part in school activities and even trained in the Yagashi dojo. From when he was a child, making him build like an athlete. Cookie also took part in national events and championships where he won and was placed in the magazine. He has an A-rank charisma that makes people attracted to him. Very rarely do people not get attracted to him, such as Shizuku and Kaori, who were his own childhood friends, and as such they were used to his antics and know him too well compared to them. There was no shadow of a doubt that Cookie was destined for greatness. Even some of the pro heroes who recognized him when he would walk on the street would send him praises and even encourage him to later join their agency as a possible sidekick. Even then, Cookie didn't look like a sidekick material. He looked like someone who would build his own agency and become his own leader. This was the impression that Kosuke had of him, since Cookie was strong and had a very good quirk. Cookie excelled at everything, even at things that are relatively new to him, as long as he put his mind into it. It made Kosuke envious because he wishes he had 1/4 of that talent to be able to do anything with just a little effort when he and others had to bust their aside from Cookie talent. He's also good at socializing with others regardless of their gender. His A-rank charisma, along with his speech, make people unable to resist him. Cookie is the only person who would get away with calling a girl by her first name. If he were to do something like this, he'd be met with a sneer and something along the line of, "Who do you think you are to call me by my first name? Who are you?" But Cookie doing it was different, since it would usually send said girls on cloud 9 from the happiness of being acknowledged. If there is anything that Kosuke had learned throughout the years of living on Earth, is that you should never defy those like Cookie. People like Cookie are the type of people who sit at the top of the world. The last person who had made Cookie as an enemy got executed, not in that sense that their head got chopped off and rolled on the ground, but rather they got executed socially. Cookie's fan club consisted largely of women who were in love with him, had just taken to making that insolent person an outcast not only in their own middle school but outside their school as well. The last Kosuke heard of that guy was how he had almost suicided one day but was saved by his parents. Some rumors had said that the guy had moved countries not only due to being outcast in their middle school but also outside their middle school. The fact that a person was forced to move countries shows how popular Cookie was to get people to react the way they did. Now, Cookie is the hero of Tortus due to his vocation. It was obvious that the kingdom would value him more than someone like him. If he defied him, what would happen to him? His paranoia had made him imagine various scenarios. Cookie could possibly dispose of him just like he almost did with Hayama. The others in the class would outcast him for doing something heinous such as accuse someone like Cookie. The possibility was endless and none of them were good at all. Kosuke, a voice interrupted his thoughts as he looked behind him to see 𝐿𝐿𝐼𝐸𝐿 standing with his arm crossed and wearing casual clothes that weren't his armor. Big brother. Kosuke blurted out in surprise while 𝐿𝐿𝐼𝐸𝐿 smiled a little at the title that the boy had given him, which he gratefully accepted since he didn't want to be only as their instructor. "What are you doing this late at night?" asked 𝐿𝐿𝐼𝐸𝐿 curiously. He had noticed that Kosuke looked bothered, especially the way he looked in fear towards Cookie, and knew something happened. Is Kosuke going to be the next sacrifice? Thought 𝐿𝐿𝐼𝐸𝐿 with a small frown on his face. The kid had grown on him and he looked at him as a little brother, so he didn't want to see Kosuke die. "I just wanted to take a stroll to relax my nerves." Kosuke stuttered nervously as he let out a small chuckle at the end to ease the atmosphere, but he was not being honest. "Is it about Cookie?" asked 𝐿𝐿𝐼𝐸𝐿, not beating around the bush, while Kosuke looked at him with surprise and a little bit of worry that he was that easy to read. "Yes," said Kosuke meekly. He decided to trust his instincts and tell 𝐿𝐿𝐼𝐸𝐿 about what he learned. Maybe, just maybe something can be done. "What exactly happened?" asked 𝐿𝐿𝐼𝐸𝐿 with a frown, and Kosuke hesitated, which 𝐿𝐿𝐼𝐸𝐿 noticed before he pulled out a bead from his pocket, which is a special artifact, and broke it on the ground, which caused a barrier to appear that blocks sound. This is a barrier artifact that blocks sound from leaving it. "You can talk without any fear," said 𝐿𝐿𝐼𝐸𝐿, while Kosuke felt more at ease when hearing that, and before long he started to explain. Even with the barrier blocking the sound, Kosuke paranoia was still there, as he would still at times occasionally glanced at his own surroundings as if to see if there was anyone who was watching them, but luckily there wasn't any person around at that time. By the end of his explanation, Kosuke was breathing hard, looking like he had just run a long marathon, while 𝐿𝐿𝐼𝐸𝐿 looked shocked by what he had heard, or should have really expected this to be the case. His hand clenched hard to the point that it turned white and blood almost started to come out. "How much is he going to fall even further?" spoke 𝐿𝐿𝐼𝐸𝐿 with a disappointed tone, and yet there was anger. He didn't particularly like Hayama, but if Cookie is willing to do this to his classmates, then the others are not going to be spared. "Why you believe me?" asked Kosuke curiously but also in worry. A story like this would make anyone think he's insane. Making accusations at the hero would be dangerous. "Yes. You may not know this, but me, Yagashi, and Shirasaki have learned about the hero's dark side. We've witnessed him push both Midoriya and Nagumo down in the abyss," said 𝐿𝐿𝐼𝐸𝐿 with a saddened look, which shocked Kosuke. This was a confirmation that his earlier suspicion was right. Cookie was behind the death of both Izuku and Haji. 𝐿𝐿𝐼𝐸𝐿 opened his eyes to look at Kosuke, hesitating to say the next words, but Kosuke deserves to know the truth. "The kingdom are already aware about his treachery because I've told them, hoping they'd do something about it, but they hardly care. To them, as long as the hero-sama is pleased and is well, then it matters not how many sacrifices need to be made," said 𝐿𝐿𝐼𝐸𝐿 with shame in his voice. Kosuke felt a pit in his stomach when he heard that. As he lowered his head in fear, his body was trembling. He didn't like this, but what can he do? "You and your other classmates are in danger. It doesn't seem like the church intends to fulfill their promise at all. I'm sorry. I truly am sorry that you have such an incompetent older brother." 𝐿𝐿𝐼𝐸𝐿 apologized deeply from the bottom of his heart as he lowered his head, almost touching the ground. Please raise your head, big brother. I don't blame you," said Kosuke frantically as he tried to get 𝐿𝐿𝐼𝐸𝐿 to raise his head. Kosuke does not blame him in the slightest. "I honestly don't know what to do. I'm ordered to just train you kids to prepare for the war. I'm mostly told to focus the most on Amanagawa since he is the one with the hero vocation," said 𝐿𝐿𝐼𝐸𝐿, while Kosuke didn't blame him. "So what next?" asked Kosuke. He was lost and confused on what to do at this point in life. He was basically told that nothing can be done at this point. You get stronger. Right now, you can't trust the kingdom to honor their own promise they made at the start. I will talk with Yagashi about it. You should stick with her and Shirasaki as well," said Meld while Kosuke looked hesitant. But what about Amanagawa? You've heard what he almost did to Hayama a few weeks back. If I get close to those two, he might try to get rid of me," said Kosuke fearfully. "We can get around this problem. During the training practice, I could pair you with them while using the excuse of a group practice," said Meld while Indu had gone quiet. Cookie won't do anything since he will view this as just a training practice and not Indu making a move at his heroines. He did what he did with Hayama because the latter was actively seeking her out and anyone could tell that he was interested in her as a woman. Indu doesn't have such feelings towards the two women, or rather he knows that he stands no chance with them. They were the two popular girls in their own middle school while he was just a guy who is easily forgotten, and even if he were to stand in between them, they wouldn't notice him. Besides, a group practice could help ease the tension a little. Right now, the hero team is breaking apart very rapidly and the nobles and royals are just noticing it. The two girls refuse to talk to Cookie, with Shizuku letting Cookie do whatever he wants, probably hoping a monster would kill him for her, and she also ignores him. Kaori on the other hand ignored Cookie every chance she got and made any excuses to get away from him. Whenever she heals him, given that she is forced to do so, she would do it in a half-but way, or if she could make Cookie feel pain while healing him, then she would jump at the opportunity to inflict pain on him. In case things become bad, the three would have each other back. Kosuke needed to up his training, and Meld was going to make sure that he would grow strong fast to fight for himself. "The future looks bleak right now, Kosuke. I need you to become a man for me and grow strong. Now that you know about Amanagawa, you're going to be a target, so you need to change in order to survive," said Meld while Indu looked at him with teary eyes. Aye, you understand, brother," said Kosuke as he wiped his tears and gained a motivated look to train hard and grow strong. So that means you three can manipulate mana directly, and you can use specialized magic?" asked Shay in clear surprise at that, as it was a very rare thing. "Yup, that's the gist of it. This vehicle and my weapons are all something akin to artifacts," explained Hajime as he drove Steve towards the direction where the other Halia are located. "So that means we're—" Shay opened her mouth, realizing that the four of them were actually very much alike, and as if predicting this, Hajime had confirmed. "Us four are all similar in how we have the same power as monsters, yeah," said Hanmei while tears welled up at the corner of Shay's eyes as she had heard the confirmation. "I see, so that's how it is." Shay sniffled her tears, which Izuku, who was driving, noticed along with you as they looked at her in confusion. "Hi, the rabbit is crying," said Yu herself as she looked at the rabbit with an exasperated look while Izuku understood a little. "What's with you all of a sudden?" asked Hajime with an exasperated look as he finally noticed that she was crying while covering her own face with both her hands. "I'm sorry, I am just so happy to find out that I'm not alone," said Shay, expressing her true feelings, having been surrounded by people who can't use mana, not only that she was ostracized by the other beastmen for it. You looked at Shay with a blank look, but one can see the look in her eyes that felt complicated. Izuku can easily guess what was going on in her mind. You probably felt some connection to Shay. "To find out that I'm not alone." That line made by Shay was probably what triggered you a little. For you, who was sealed in the labyrinth for 300 years, she was happy that she was no longer alone, as she had Izuku and Haji. For you, her entire race is dead, making her possibly the last of her kind. Her kingdom is also destroyed as a result because no one is there to manage it. This left her alone and without any purpose, but ever since Izuku entered her life, and she felt that there was a meaning to her being alive. Izuku was like her. Izuku had the accelerated healing that functions like her own automatic regeneration, making the two of them immortal. She also got to have her dream come true in the form of being saved by a descendant of Sparta. So even though she still felt the effects of being abandoned and betrayed by her uncle and her subjects, she felt that as long as Izuku was with her, then she didn't need anything else in this world. Smooch. Izuku, who had seen the look on her face, had placed a kiss on the nape of her neck and pulled her back closer to him. You blushed as she looked at him in surprise. "You're not alone. We will return home together no matter what." said Izuku in a softer tone as you heard this and gulped hard, trying her best to control her emotions since if she didn't she might cry a little from happiness. It was not fair. Despite the fact that she was expressionless at times, Izuku could easily read her just by a glance. He knew how she was feeling and was quick to comfort her and assure her for a better future together. "You're my wife now. I'd like to marry you properly once we return to Japan together in a ceremony. After 2 to 3 years after we return, I'd like to have a family with you." Izuku whispered in her ears. "I'd like to have a family with you," ringed in Yu's head as her eyes turned into hearts. This meant that Izuku had no issues with having a family with her and she already started to daydream. In Yu's mind, she was imagining herself cradling a baby in her arms who has white hair and crimson-red eyes. She was imagining Izuku hugging her from behind as he looked over their baby with a smile on his face. "I want Izuku's babies. I want his 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 babies," thought Yu in her head as she kept repeating it in her head like a broken record, looking like she had already lost her mind, and she started to wiggle her butt against his crotch. "Amhata-san, can you also comfort me?" asked Shay as she saw the interaction between Izuku and Yu, as with her rabbit ears, she was able to somewhat hear their conversation. This naturally made her jealous and she looked at Hajime expectantly since after seeing her cry like this, he was supposed to say something like what his friend said, such as, "Don't worry Shay dear, will save you and my family-in-law and then I will take you back home with me." That kind of thing. "Why should I do something so troublesome, you useless rabbit?" Hajime said in a tyrannical voice as he had just cruelly dismissed an appealing maiden like her who needed comfort. When he and Izuku were deep in the abyss fighting for their lives, none of them were trying to comfort each other since what they needed wasn't that type of comfort, instead they wanted to survive. Their own version of comforting each other was them each other off. It gave them a sense of normalcy which they both had just desperately needed to cling on what is left of their humanity. It also took their mind off the fact that they got betrayed. Not to mention they were men. Real men don't cry. It was a line made by the great elf men from fairy tale. Of course, it didn't mean they couldn't cry, but in a situation where their own lives are at stake, just sitting at a corner and just crying while blaming others for their misfortune would not solve anything, as it would be a waste of time. For Hajime and even Izuku, waiting for others to comfort you is a waste of time and is useless. The two of them had cried in the past when they were labeled as quirkless by society and when they both got bullied and shunned, but they had already run out of tears. Expecting others to comfort you or do things for you is not going to change anything. It only makes you weak because you depend on others to give you those pills that are comforting, but it's only temporary. For them, the only thing they can do is to struggle in this life and work hard to change their situation. "Oi Hajime, you sure you're not a descendant of Shikamaru Nara?" said Izuku in a mocking voice while Hajime, like a typical Yakuza, flipped him the bird. Suddenly a horde of monsters can be seen in front of them. Those were the Hyveria, which are a giant winged monster that is similar in appearance to a wyvern. 5 of them can be spotted flying in the air. That horde of monsters, that might be. Shay, who was about to complain earlier after Hajime's rude answer, had become alarmed at the sight of those monsters that hunted her own tribe from the air. "I know. Settle down. I'm flooring it, so you better hold on tight," said Hajime, clearly unbothered by the sight of those flying monsters, as they were simply just a group of small fry. The Hylia tribe were panicking as they started to run like headless chickens, trying to run behind rocks to hide from those monsters that were flying down to eat them. One particular female Hylia took to covering for her child with her body as a Hyveria rushed towards them with the intention to eat them both at the same time. A bullet had quickly pierced the head of the Hyveria, which had surprised the Hylia mother, who looked back to see the Hyveria dead on the ground with its head bleeding. This naturally confused the rest of the tribe of useless rabbits as they looked around and saw the 2 approaching vehicles, which scared them as they had assumed that this was another new type of monster. "Hey everyone! I found us some help!" shouted Shay, unaware that her large BRZ was pressed at the top of Hajime's head, who gave her the stink eyes as her BRZ was getting in the way. "Say, The rest of the Halia tribe shouted in happiness upon seeing the girl riding this monster, which they assumed that she had either tamed it or the guy in front of her had tamed a monster and was using it for transportation. Izuku pulled Ebony, which is a semi-automatic pistol from his own treasure trove, as he pointed the muzzle of the pistol at one of the Hyveria that is afar and shot it with a bullet that is instilled with his demonic power. Ebony is a left-handed black gun that has been modified for long-distance targeting and comfort, while the right-handed white gun, Ivory, was custom-built for rapid firing and fast draw times. "The hell?" shouted Hajime as he looked at Izuku, who smirked at him while holding the black gun in his left hand and flipped him the bird. Ebony and Ivory were pistols that he saw in one of his dreams where his own ancestor Dante was using it. He had also learned how to wield them the same way as Dante had done, so he's good at it. "Anything you can do, I could do it even better," said Izuku tauntingly, which triggered Hajime enough to take this as a challenge as he found 𝐒𝐮𝐵𝐲 bounce on his head, which added onto his ire. "If you're feeling well enough to get in the way, I'd better make you work," said Hajime as with veins in his head, he grabbed the top of her head. "Work?" asked 𝐒 in confusion, unaware that she was going to be used as a bait for the Hyveria so that Hajime can win this competition and prove that he is still better at this than Izuku. "What? It'll be easy. I'm just gonna ask you to be bait for these hungry monsters. Go get 'em, you worthless rabbit," shouted Hajime as he tossed 𝐒 towards the hungry Hyveria. "No!" shouted 𝐒 in panic as she found herself fast approaching towards the swarm of Hyveria that noticed her and approached her to eat her while she was floating in the air. "I will prove to you why I'm the best at this, yabi," shouted Hajime towards Izuku as the latter smirked at him, and the two started firing bullets at the Hyveria that was approaching 𝐒. By the end of this, Hajime did win, not surprising since the guy had pursuit skill, so technically speaking, gunning and the likes were his area of expertise, unlike Izuku, whose area of expertise is swordsmanship. "Your pursuit skill is what saved you," said Izuku while clicking his tongue, but he expected it while Hajime stuck his tongue out like some child while also flipping the bird. "Hajime, you cheater," you said in a monotone voice. She had managed to notice that Hajime used his pursuit skill to shoot others' bullets to intercept Izuku's bullet. "Everything is legal as long as you don't get caught," was both Izuku and Hajime's motto, so it was no surprise that Hajime would do something so evil and underhanded like sending bullets to intercept Izuku's own just to win. If someone with proper common sense heard this, they'd have their san value shaved off. In the first place, you shouldn't be doing something illegal, but the two didn't care about something so stupid and meaningless. The two motorcycles stylishly swerved before the Halia tribe that looked like their soul had come out of their mouth when seeing 𝐒 being thrown like this, especially her father Cam, who almost had a heart attack. Hajime held his metallic prosthetic left arm out as 𝐒 comically fell head first on his palm as he grabbed her before she could impact the ground and turn into bloody paste. At the same time, the dead Hyveria started raining from the sky as the green lush field that was the forest started to get dyed with the orange blood of the Hyveria that were killed. "I can't take this anymore. You're being so rough with me," said 𝐒 with tears forming in the corner of her eyes and comical eyes, but Hajime could care less about her complaints and instead tossed her to the ground. "Can I ask for gentler treatment?" asked 𝐒 with her eyes swirling from the shock and dizziness she had gone through. It was truly a traumatizing event after having been used as a monster bait. After things calmed down enough and the situation was explained through the troublesome 𝐒 Halia, the leader of the Halia tribe, who is also the father of 𝐒, had stepped forward with his head lowered in a bow. The other Halia tribe also were present but standing a few feet behind their leader as they looked at the group of humans, anxiously not knowing whether they would be attacked and turned into or were they actually going to be saved. Regardless, given their awareness of 𝐒's particular atavist power of being able to see into the future, they trusted her to make the right decision. Really, if anything, they all felt touched by the fact that she would risk her life for their own sake. "You would be Mr. Hajime and Mr. Izuku, I presume. I am 𝐒's father, Cam Halia, and the chieftain of the Halia tribe." Cam introduced himself to the two gentlemen before him. Cam is a middle-aged man with squinted eyes, short-cut dark blue hair and a beard. He has a fairly skinny build. As a rabbitman, Cam has rabbit ears atop her head. You have my deepest gratitude for saving our tribe, said Kam as he bowed his head once more towards Hajime and Izuku. Gratitude noted. But don't forget about our deal to guide us through the sea of trees, got it? Hajime's voice came out as a warning to them that this wasn't a charity they were doing. We will protect you and your tribe throughout the journey as per the deal, so if there is anything worth mentioning, it's better to cough it up so we wouldn't be surprised, said Izuku as well while they nodded their heads. Monsters will swarm all over us in no time if we stick around here. We're getting out of here for now, said Hajime while they nodded their heads once more in understanding.